其實唔係好多家長咧肯用好多時間去聽呢個升學講座為自己子女，揾專家嘅即係諮詢係好重要。Hello， 大家好，係嘛哇！我見好多即係家長喺度咯喎，真係嚇，多謝晒你哋先嚇。我見得到咧，你哋都有愛心啦，係咪？原因係因為我即係出現嘅時候，大家都即係大呼小叫，呢個好大嘅愛心嚟㗎。多謝晒你哋啊！當然最重要嘅愛心咧，其實唔係好多家長咧肯用好多時間去聽呢個升學講座為自己子女。我見咧今日每一個家長都坐喺度。我記得嗰陣時候就我太太去做嘅，咁所以咧呢度咧俾啲掌聲你覺得每一位，哎呀好有愛心嘅你哋啊！
今日啦，多謝晒 Samuel 啦、森美啦，你哋兩位嚟到嗱，大家都知道啊 Samuel 就係個升學嘅 expert， 但係咧其實咧有個 funny fact 嘅，其實你哋兩位咧都係真係親身 experience 嘅，你就係幫仔仔啦，其實咧 Samuel 咧之前咧亦都幫過佢自己嘅表妹啦，去放佢入去 boarding school， 安排佢哋真係自己親身 experience 過嘅，而大家都知啦，森美嘅仔仔高材生，哇好羨慕啦，係咪？究竟有啲咩 tips 可以陣間咧同我哋分享森美？其實咧我知道咧仔仔咧之前去咗外國啦，跟住之後翻返嚟香港，但係跟住9月依家又要去再去係咪啊？其實依一個 status 係點樣嘅咧？
首先我講我同阿 Samuel 之間嘅關係啦，因為其實中間有一個升學嘅過程當中，我仔仔有啲問題咧，我都問過阿 Samuel，記得嗰陣時候考完GC。即係嘅時候啊，咁啊佢另一間學校嘅時候，咁所以喺個過程當中揾專家嘅即係諮詢係好重要嘅。咁啊，而我記得我嗰時候細個嘅時候，我仔仔去讀書嘅時候咧就係去讀中四啦，就嗰邊我跟住考會考啦，跟住 A level 啦。咁佢考咗好嘅成績之後咧，咁我哋就想佢翻嚟香港，咁所以佢翻嚟香港就讀醫科，讀咗2年之後咧喺香港大學讀咧，通常咧佢哋會有1年咧係叫 enrichment year，就俾佢讀其他科目嘅嘢，又或者佢中意讀咩都得嘅。咁佢就揀翻去英國就去讀佢嘅 public health 嘅 master， 咁讀1年嘅啫。咁因為嗰個係俾醫科嘅學生去讀嘅。咁跟住翻香港咧就完成埋佢香港嘅醫科課程咯。咁所以佢有啲奇怪嘅，有啲人問我：你個仔係咪去英國讀書啊？我係啊，翻咗嚟啦，但係佢又去啦咁樣。咁係會有啲亂嘅咁樣。咁所以呢個情況係比較特別啦。
明白。咁我相信9月嘅嘢，你依家已經有 experience，well prepared。但係我哋講翻一開始嘅時候先。嗱，一開始嘅時候其實啦，無論嗰啲點樣揀咩地點啊，喺咩學校啊，安排住宿啊，日常嘅生活開支，哇！其實嗰一刻真係知道咁多嘢要 tackle 嘅時候，你有冇覺得好頭痕？定係其實你已經有老婆幫晒你啦？
唔係，哎呀，我哋做老公嘅都頭痕㗎，因為個太太每日都問你一次㗎嘛，係啊，佢一有新嘅資料佢就問我一次嘅，一問我一次嘅時候我又要諗一次㗎啦，咁樣，咁我會同佢一齊去做個決定嘅，咁個資料搜集好多時候都係佢嘅，咁當然都其實幾時去到已經好麻煩㗎啦，因為我太太成日都問我幾時去㗎，咁我話幾時去啊？咁佢話咁我話總之 A level 去考咗 A level 都得。其實嗰陣時候我想佢避開咩？避開嗰個香港考中文。我諗好多家長都係，因為我仔個中文好差嘅。咁啊，我要避咗中文咧，就過去嗰邊考會考啦，係咪？過英國咁我問咁啊過咗考會考咪得咯？我同佢講係咪啊？我太太話唔係喎，咁要早1年咯喎。我話點解咧？佢早1年咧等佢預備啦嘛。咁啊早1年預備咪早1年預備咪得咯？佢又唔得喎。咁佢啦，你早1年預備咧，你都要再早少少揾一間睇下佢適唔適應嘅喎，佢適應到先得喎。咁我咁再早啲啦，佢再早啲又唔得喎。我話點解再早啲又唔得咧？佢話太早咧就冇咗喺香港讀書嗰個優勢啦。因為香港讀書咧谷得好緊㗎嘛，係咪啊？谷得好行㗎嘛。你好早就過咗去咧，冇咗個優勢。咁即係幾時去啊？咁樣。咁咧我太太就話唔好理啦。考咗先啊咁樣，咁所以我記得嗰陣時候我記得佢中二嘅時候就已經開始考試去英國㗎啦。咁啊考咗，咁啊考到間學校，咁佢就諗住過去啦。咁個仔又唔想去啦。哎呀，真係過5關斬6將，佢話我唔想去啊咁樣。咁我唔想去，我好開心，因為我唔想使嗰個錢㗎嘛。係啊，咁跟住然之後我好唔去好啊。點知第2年咧佢又考到。 咁然之後咧，佢話想去啦，原因因為佢身邊好多同學都走咗。咁當同學走咗嘅時候，佢又覺得走啦，又或者係講佢見到個公開試就到，佢啲中文亦都冇乜進步，佢都發覺係要走啦咁樣，咁所以佢就走啦咁樣。咁所以嗰陣時候，我諗我擔心你要講時間嘅時候已經好，即係幾時去嘅時候都已經搞咗其實好幾年㗎啦。咁再加上去到嗰度讀邊間，咁又要揾啦，因為咁多間學校係咪？學校當中咧有啲咧就係出名嘅名校係咪傳統名校？咁個個都想㗎嘛。一講你讀邊間學校啊，我講間學校就即係你覺得哎呀，即係嗰啲錢抵使啊，係抵使啦，係啊係啊。咁啊，但係好似我太太唔係喎，呢間學校成績好喎，你睇下佢會考嘅成績10大喎咁樣。咁去到最後咧，嗰個決定咧都係放咗喺個仔仔度。咁我哋就問佢嗱，你自己決定啦。有一間咧就係咧可能係傳統啲嘅係名校嚟嘅，有一間咧就係對於你成績可能有幫助嘅學校嚟嘅咁樣。咁睇下究竟你覺得邊樣啱你啲。咁嗰陣時候我仔仔佢就自己嘅選擇上面就揀咗某一間學校啦。咁揀咗之後咧，咁佢就過去啦。咁我記得我考完仔仔考完之後。佢成績好好，因為佢嗰邊考出11科全部 A star 嘅。咁跟住然之後，其實佢翻，所以都可以再去選擇多一次，究竟邊間學校揀 A level。我喺嗰陣時候問 Samuel，咁啊問咗啲意見啦咁樣。咁所以其實每一段時間裏邊其實都有啲擔憂，因為再加上小朋友呢，我個小朋友有另外一個擔憂就係佢經常轉佢自己嘅嗜好啊。佢由過去嗰陣時候呢，佢想過英國讀history 咁樣，咁後尾又想讀politics，跟住後邊不斷轉就想讀 biochem。咁佢每一個轉變，其實對於我哋家長嚟講都要諗究竟你喺邊度呢？咁去邊度讀書呢？繼續去升學，而影響到究竟我哋點樣幫佢 plan 佢嗰個路程點行？咁去到最後佢想讀醫科，咁我哋就想佢翻嚟香港咁樣。咁所以去到最後，咁佢都肯翻嚟香港。咁所以中間其實如果你咁講，好多擔憂，仲未講去到揾到學校，見到我哋第一次去到間學校，我都擔憂㗎。間學校咁細嘅喂，係啊，咁真係有嗰個擔憂嘅，但係結果嗰個學校以為好細，冇得地方俾佢玩，結果原來都唔係。佢去到嗰度以前喺香港唔中意運動嘅，結果每朝早跑步。咁然之後佢就入咗，即係因為佢有足球隊有好多，香港足球隊有得隊嘅啫，香港係咪？大部分學校都，佢哋足球隊咧有4隊喎。咁因為第一隊係最叻，第二隊冇咁叻，第3隊又冇咁叻，第4隊都冇咁叻。係啊。佢話入到校隊，我驚一驚。佢話阿爸唔使驚，第3隊。咁所以去到最後，佢都翻到嚟香港，佢有運動啦，成個人改變咗啦。咁呢一個都係我即係好多嘅擔憂冇咗嘅嘢啦。
Samuel 啊，你就係呢方面嘅 expert 啦。咁你咧亦都見過好多唔同類型嘅爸爸媽媽啦，即係森美係其中一種啦。其實你覺得 IE parents out of all，佢哋覺得最煩惱其實係啲乜嘢咧？
哇，講煩惱，我驚我哋講多半個鐘頭都唔夠。其實幾時去英國真係一個，我諗係個第一個問題嚟嘅。每個家長都要介紹翻自己少少先。我係9歲去英國嘅，我就好細個去啦。咁我覺得唔同年紀去其實有唔同嘅學習過程嘅，即係好似森美大哥咁講，阿 Lancelot 佢係15、16歲先去嘅，咁可能就你都會感受到 boarding school。但係你係可能以目標行先嘅，可能要準備入醫學院啊，要報大學啊。我去咁細個去呢，我父母嗰陣時就係想我開心啲讀書，可能係比較真係好似啱啱大哥講，哇，玩多啲運動，學下英文，融入下當地文化。咁就話，但父母有啲咩擔心？太細個去有得有失。好似我咁，我啲廣東話、啲中文真係非常之麻麻地嘅。係啊，我要而家用錄音啊，好彩個科技開始先進。可以幫到你。咁同埋可能有啲父母又擔心，哎呀咁細個去會唔會個親子關係冇咁好啊？又冇咁扯啊！即係香港讀書其實都好有好多嘢我都覺得非常之好嘅，係咪？可能執行性比較好，係咪？你嘅有啲學生係我覺得比較適合香港讀嘅，係嘛？唔係個個適合國際嘅教學。咁你又要諗啦，係嘛？家長要諗下究竟係揀 A level 好啊，定 IB 好啊，定係 PU 啊？好不同嘅學制都有佢嘅優點啦。咁同埋未必係英國㗎，係嘛？我見到今日好多朋友嚟到，可能講下美國，講下加拿大，我覺得唔同國家有佢嘅吸引力嘅。咁揀翻個適合嘅學制俾自己咯。Boarding school 咧，我覺得就未必係最好嘅教育。 但係就好適合港人嘅，真係。我自己就讀得非常之開心嘅。
明白。咁我知道咧，你間公司啦，其實就係一個監護人嘅公司嘅角色。咁其實呢一個角色係做啲乜嘢嘅咧？其實點樣幫啲 IE parents 咧？
我哋就係升學中心嚟嘅，其實監護人公司係我哋其中一個 department 㗎嘛。咁其實每個去英國讀書嘅咧，都要有個監護人嘅。咁係而家係嗰邊嘅要求嚟㗎啦。其實就係18歲以下你有個 guardian，因為好多短假。咁佢其實佢嘅功能主要就係我哋一年有3個 half term，係咪都係10日8日假咁啦。咁你就好少會飛翻香港嘅，咁就要揾當地嘅 host family。咁同埋佢個角色，監護人嘅角色就會似翻當家長去英國咁啦。如果你譬如突然間急事要做手術，咁冇理由打翻香港，咁就係監護人幫你做晒你決定啦。咁監護人都好緊要嘅，所以。但係我哋本身公司就係幫學生，其實都一條龍㗎啦，去英國申請啊、考試啊、補習啊、監護人等等。
明白，森美啊，其實咧我好想知道咧，當初你仔仔去到，佢其實有冇嗰啲homesick嘅問題啊？有冇啲嘢你有做到，或者老婆有做到，係可以幫佢更加快可以適應當地嘅生活啊、culture 等等嘅咧？
可能因為佢係男仔啦，咁我自己因為我中1、2嘅時候我都係喺香港讀寄宿學校嘅，咁所以我明白一個男仔喺中學即係青春期過後，盡快想離開爸爸媽媽嗰種感覺係，所以佢好快已經融入咗啦，係咁即我又唔擔心嘅。不過當中有啲擔心嘅就係佢驚佢同啲同學之間關係好唔好咁樣，因為始終因為佢喺學校裏邊都有好多其他，我記得嗰陣時佢同房嘅係有泰國啦。有台灣有好多唔同嘅地方嘅人啦嚇，咁但係記得嗰陣時係泰國嘅同學同佢係有啲拗撬嘅，咁因為佢同我講過爸爸嗰個泰國同學成日喺度玩飛刀啊喺我側邊，係啊，跟住話咁佢點啊？佢成日飛把刀我隔離，咁你點啊？我告俾老師聽啊！咁我話又唔使告住嘅，即係你出外靠朋友，你即刻同房你就告咗，咁你好難相處噶嘛咁樣。咁嗰陣時我同佢咁我話你告咗點啊？佢一日都鬧我啊咁樣，咁我話咪係咯咁樣，咁所以原來我冇教佢點同人相處，即係你知我哋做爸爸媽媽好少嘅喺香港，我教你點同人相處啦，好少講呢一樣嘢。總之佢唔係打交就可以啦。咁但係嗰次就佢慢慢學好咗，結果嗰個泰國嘅同學就成為咗佢好朋友啦。咁所以我覺得呢一個係我覺得其中一個要佢同其他同學甚至唔同國籍。同埋有一啲去到英國嘅時候呢，佢好多時候文化上都唔同啊。咁有好多唔同種族嘅人啦，大家嘅忌諱都唔同。咁佢有一段時間，我記得佢有個同房係非裔嘅留學生啦。佢成日叫佢做 black guy 啊。咁但係根本就唔得嘅，但係佢覺得冇所謂。結果直到個同學告佢嘅時候，佢先知道原來佢做錯咗，嚴重性係幾多。咁呢個又係嗰陣時候，我又唔會知道要教佢嘅嘢。咁原來呢樣喎，仲有喎，因為佢喺嗰個地方咧裏邊咧，佢嗰個地方係比較開放啲。咁而佢喺英國翻咧就翻呢個浸信會嘅 church 啦。咁對於咧性取向方面咧又有拗撬喎。就算翻到去學校同啲即係學校嘅人啦，同埋佢嘅教會咧都有拗撬。咁佢唔識處理，佢翻嚟就問我啦。咁當佢問我嘅時候，咁我又要處理埋嗰個方面。所以呢啲喺文化上邊嘅事咧，都係我哋喺香港好少會遇到嘅。但係去到英國嘅時候，佢就要遇到。咁我就每一次都要諗辦法去同佢處理啊，同佢講啊咁樣。咁當然你啲小朋友有時佢仲會，因為我個仔有啲都似地我咧，都會中意挑戰下啲嘢咁樣。譬如佢過去之前，我已經同佢講過，你有啲嘢要小心啲啊。譬如好似人哋嘅歷史，咁佢都知嘅。譬如話納粹嘅嘢就唔可以立亂講㗎啦，咁樣咁佢知。佢竟然有一次無端端咧佢畫咗佛教嗰個萬字個符號，咁我就知道佢係想做呢件事，特登去挑戰。咁佢啲其他人見到嘅時候就會同佢講。咁佢同我講過，呢個都唔係，我知唔係，但係你唔可以做。咁呢啲都係文化上面好容易觸及到人哋最痛嘅一樣嘢，但係佢自己唔明白，佢仲覺得嗰樣嘢好玩。咁所以呢樣嘢就我嗰陣時候送佢去嘅時候，我比較擔心嘅嘢啦。咁亦都真係遇到嘅。咁不過喺學術上邊方面我就比較安心啲啦，因為佢一過去個第一個禮拜咧，我哋有個 Apps 咧，佢就即刻話俾你聽你個學校如何，即係啲家長同學校之間嘅聯繫。第一個禮拜我哋收到個信息就係個仔要留堂，
未留班，
留堂，佢一留堂，唉點解咧？咁你知啦，通常你見到個仔女留堂，你梗係唔開心噶嘛。我同我太太唔係好開心。係咪因為點解佢留堂？佢上堂唔專心。 佢上堂唔專心都留堂，咁即係間學校管得嚴啦。哎呀，我哋啲家長最中意就係佢管得嚴啊，啱啦。咁所以喺反而去到發覺，原來有時因為佢喺英國。其實個讀書嗰個要求程度同香港差唔多，上堂佢都要俾即係專心啦，或者唔可以走嚟走嚟走去啦。你唔專心嘅話，佢都會罰佢留堂啦咁樣。咁反而冇學術上面冇咩值得擔心，反而係生活上文化上面嗰啲有多啲嘢擔心。
Samuel 話：你嘅 recommendation 咧，最佳年齡過去英國讀書係幾多歲咧？或者有冇啲 tips 可以 share 俾大家？如果真係遇到小朋友過咗去，佢非常 homesick，佢成日要嘈住要翻嚟屋企，點樣可以解決咧？
好問題。幾多歲？我覺得唔同年紀去都有佢嘅得着嘅，即係個學習過程唔同。香港家長多揾我哋係13歲去英國可能你聽朋友講中2、中3去英國係最多，因為嗰個係中學嘅第一年。英國嘅學制係一路 prep school prep 到香港嘅中2度，咁你就升中學啦。咁中學讀5年嘅啫，咁所以第一年有咩好處就係全部都係新生啊，全部都係即係你又大家都係新生就識朋友容易啲啦。跟住你又有1年時間可以唔使揀科，因為中4、中5呢就係我哋以前舊制一樣會考，中6、中7就高考。咁你去到英國好多家長想就係即係擴闊視野啊，唔係淨係讀書啊嘛。你想感受下當地生活啊，咁所以有1年時間唔使公開試呢，其實就好吸引啦。咁同埋中文你就叫做聽讀講寫，你可以有一定嘅foundation 先去英國，咁所以就多人揀13歲去啦。咁但係其實女校呢，由11歲開始嘅喎，唔知點解。咁所以女仔有時又早2年去。而家亦都有個年輕化嘅趨勢，即係尤其是呢幾年嘅 initiative 啦，多咗人係越嚟越細個去。我自己就9歲去嘅，咁我覺得有得有失咯。細個去咪，我又唔覺得唔孝順嘅喎，但係我而家都係仲好錫我屋企人啦，同佢一齊住嗰啲嘢。咁我覺得係嗰個得失就係可能係我係真係好融入英國文化嘅，即係我細個真係會同佢哋騎馬。譬如可能真係會打板球，可能我打到第1隊啦，我就咪第3隊啦。可能細個融入啦，咁但係唔好嘅地方就可能係貴先啦，首先係嘛，一定唔止260幾萬啦，即刻嚇。我而家好細，我係啱啱睇一睇嗰個數我都驚，我啱啱 commit 咗供3個，2個侄1個表妹去英國讀書，係啦，就係書經驗。早知聽呢啲講座，我可能再諗多啲先決定。咁但係佢哋我亦都好細個送佢哋去，我自己係好 buy 出國讀書係一個 character building， 我哋話性格上嘅塑造，我覺得都緊要嘅。咁但係你話如果喂唔係，我個目標係入一流嘅大學，咁其實幾時去，可能個終點都係一樣，可能都係牛津劍橋或者 Warwick 都，即係其實唔係話早去就會入到叻啲嘅大學，純粹個過程唔同，個得着都唔同。
森美啊，其實咧，你除咗英國之外，當時有冇考慮其他國家㗎？
咁又真係冇喎，因為可能我自己比較喜歡，即係我覺得英國嗰個文化同埋個學制同香港比較近少少啦。咁同埋即係我嗰陣時真係冇諗過其他國家。
不如依家咧，我哋請 Samuel 咧講一講。其實我知道咧，英國咧有好多唔同類型嘅學校，私立學校啦、政府學校啦、grammar school 啦。其實呢啲可唔可以好簡單講俾大家聽個分別啊？
好，最簡單分別就係要俾錢同唔使俾錢先。咁以前咧一直以嚟我哋了解嘅學校都係私立學校㗎啦。記得你如果諗緊小班教學啊。有好多活動啊，哈利波特咁又要打下波，又翻下學咁樣咧，嗰啲係私校係嘛？就唔會將英國升學就等於咗英國學校咁樣啦。因為咧而家就多咗個選擇，有啲人可以去到英國生活，咁啊讀本地嘅免費嘅學校。咁其實嗰啲叫 state school。state 咁 state 底下咧有 state comprehensive 同埋 state grammar。簡單啲講就係佢係 selective 定係 non-selective 啦，即係佢可以揀學生嘅話咧。嗰啲就係 grammar school，係嘛？嗰個文化學校成績就通常就比較好嘅，160幾間啫，成個英國得翻。咁仲要係非常之難入嘅。其實有可能少少似香港嘅某啲直資學校咁啦，好多本地人都要補習啊，好細個就 training 啊，去考一個叫做11 plus 嘅考試。咁就好細個報名，跟住就去考。入唔到嘅話咧，就16歲再試一次。總之文化學校就係比較成績好嘅公立學校，咁其餘嘅就係 comprehensive school 啦。咁就 你基本上住喺邊個郵編就係嗰個 council 派位嘅，咁所以就冇得你去決定啦。咁私立學校就係亦都有寄宿同埋唔寄宿嘅，咁但係嗰啲就叫 independent school。有一個字大家要留意嘅就係 public school， 即係香港嘅 public school 咧係公立學校啊嘛。英國 public school 如果你話I'm a public school boy， 其實係你係讀緊私校，最叻最 selective 嘅學校係 public school， 即係伊頓公學啊嘛。係點解係 public 咧？咁就係太長啦，就唔講啦。總之 public school 係公立學校咯。
咁如果當有個 parent 佢想申請佢嘅小朋友去讀寄宿學校啦，咁其實咧佢喺 timetable 上佢有啲咩時間咩月份佢哋要注意咧？佢應該要提前幾早去準備呢一個 application 嘅 preparation。究竟個小朋友係遞咗張 form 咁啊得啊，定係我係要去面試啊，要去筆試係點樣嘅咧
？90%嘅學校其實我諗1年前報名係合理嘅，咁但係而家即係我諗首先私校咧已經係啱啱所講，其實唔係好多人考得到嘅，英國都係得7% 英國人考得到 public school 啊私校嘅啫。咁所以其實已經係金字塔嘅頂層嘅啦。咁但係有時即係我哋報學校啊啲父母可能想喺個金字塔再揾金字塔頂。咁如果你真係要好 selective、好出名、好著名、歷史最悠久嘅學校，有時可能真係要好早，有啲學校係10歲半前就要報名，但係其實本地人係一大肚已經打電話去登記啦。咁個 Eton 咁啦，譬如係會咁樣嘅。咁但係我覺得我哋講翻 generally 嘅話咧，2-3年其實好合理㗎啦。咁要留意嘅就係9月呢個月份啦，因為應該都係9月入學嘅。咁通常啲招生年度就係9月就會好多學校會嚟香港，可能同我哋做一啲升學嘅展覽啊，interview days 啊，咁今年9月就報下年入學咯。
森美最後一條問題啦。嗱，咁我知道仔仔你就搞掂晒啦，咁阿女咧都準備去讀書嘅。咁其實今次咧去同佢申請嘅 application 上，同上一次同阿仔做嘅時候，你有冇 learn from experience？ 有冇容易咗好多咧？可唔可以 share 下？
其實都冇啊！我中意頭先你問一問，我諗下點解嗰陣時候揀英國，我突然間醒翻起，因為係嗰陣時候仔仔想讀 history，咁佢好中意英國嘅歷史，咁所以佢揀英國。我都記得係好多時候都要揀翻佢哋嘅喜好，即係譬如原來你想讀譬如話係網上邊嘅而家新科技少少嘅嘢，可能或者我哋會揀美國。我諗都係講佢嘅興趣。不過我小朋友嘅興趣真係成日都改嘅，呢個，但係我盡力量啦咁樣。咁而家女就當然，如果即係佢要再揀嘅時候，我哋就會容易揀好多啦。即係因為佢又大咗少少啦咁樣。咁因為疫情早幾年佢就冇過去啦。咁所以如果再過嘅話咧，都係因應佢嘅興趣而去揀。咁我諗而家個經驗好咗好多。咁因為佢冇去幾年啦，咁我哋嘅儲備又多咗好多。咁喺呢方面咧就真係自由度多好多啦。
Thank you， 今日咧唔該晒兩位啦。
Okay, just thank you for coming in. Allow me to quickly introduce you in Cantonese, and also when we speak and chat, do leave me some time so I can translate into Cantonese as well. 咁我咧就係專業就幫學生去英國讀中小學啦。咁但係其實報大學咧，其實都好多技巧嘅。咁基本上我而家見咁多香港家長咧，大部分話嚟緊14、15歲要點準備啊？大部分都係話咁最緊要就係考好個公開試啦。咁但係其實香港咧，基本上大部分想考牛津劍橋又好，英國 G5 大學嘅都好啦，成績基本上就係一個 given 㗎啦。大家都係讀好咗書先算，呢個係我哋香港嘅文化。咁但係如果報英國海外嘅大學咧，其實就唔淨止要好成績嘅，都要好多技巧嘅。咁今日好開心有啲時間，滙豐可以請我哋嚟，咁就希望校長可以分享下究竟報英國大學嘅流程係點樣啦。咁我都介紹下呢間學校，簡短介紹下呢間學校。如果有冇人英國讀有了解過英國嘅中學啊？呢間係一間好著名嘅學校啦，因為2019年咧喺英國係排名第一高校。咁2022年其實佢92%咧嘅學生係攞 A*A 嘅。咁呢位 Yasmin Sawa 除咗喺2022年，其實佢連續10年咧喺英國已經創辦咗第2間學校啦，都係排名第一嘅。咁而家係排名第1同第3嘅學校都係由佢創辦嘅。咁呢間學校就喺英國非常之著名，每年就幫好多學生考入牛津劍橋。同我哋以前即係我哋了解嘅英國學校有少少唔同，就係其實佢8-9成嘅學生都係來自海外嘅，所以特別受香港學生歡迎。醫學院係特別犀利嘅，因為佢差唔多有 過半嘅學生都係想入醫學院先會入呢間學院嘅。係咁樣，呢啲亦都係 recent 嘅 successful case， 你見到好犀利係嘛？咁但係其實唔係個個都一早就已經會 plan 定出國讀書。咁不如我哋就聽下校長有咩分享，14、15歲嘅學生究竟有啲咩準備？So Kim, thank you for being here. So not all students have the planning to study in the UK, but at the age of 14, 15, what should they prepare? What's the procedure to apply to a top UK university?
I think what students need to do is to be open to everything, and here I'm talking academically, but actually look for their passion, because it's only when they find their passion and they've explored and they've discovered what really interests them that they find the motivation to actually do really, really well. And once they've found their passion, it's places like Oxford International College with their really, really bespoke, individualised program where the magic word is strategy. Can we get them to top universities? It's not enough to have good grades. It's not enough to be smart. These students, the ones you can see up on the screen, are all smart. But not all of them would have got there if they didn't have a strategy, a strategic pathway designed for them.
But practically then, how do you showcase the university that I have the passion? Is it through personal statement? How do we apply?
Well, one of the first things we do at Oxford International College is give each student an academic strategy tutor, okay? And what an academic strategy tutor does is monitor their progress, work with them, and identify what they're interested in. Once we've identified what they're interested in, together you do the research into courses they're interested in, universities they're interested in, and we work together to make sure that happens. That's still not enough. From week 3, from joining us, you will start on your admissions test preparation. A-levels are not enough. Lots of universities feel that A-levels have been downgraded. I personally don't think so. They are really hard to get good grades in, but lots of universities go, not so sure. So they're increasingly looking at admissions tests. They're now also looking at having their own admissions tests. So from week 3, our year 12 students, AS students, start on their admissions test preparation. So by the time they get to sitting the tests, they can do them really, really well. That's absolutely key. Another thing we do is our teachers teach the admissions tests, but we also bring in mentors. Most of them come from Oxford University. Most of them are doing masters and DPhils. And they are smart. They are super smart. And if our students spend a year, 2 years, a couple of times a week with really smart young people who have sat these tests recently, it's a competitive advantage. It's really, really worth having. And it's also, I call it our sneaky interview prep. You spend all this time with these mentors, so by the time you go for your Oxford, Cambridge, G5 university interview, you're not fazed, or you're less fazed, because you've spent all this time with really, really smart people. So the mentors are important, the admission test preparation is important, and it's really important that our students have passion, motivation, and determination. That goes a long way. And by motivation and determination, they need to take advantage of every single thing we offer. When our students this year have finished their GCSEs and our Year 12 have finished their AS exams, they're not going home, not for a couple of weeks. The GCSE are going to Wales, and they are going to be challenged physically and mentally by doing some things that I wouldn't do. They're going to do lots of things, but one of the things they're going to do is called co-steering.
Sorry?
Co-steering.
Okay.
Yeah, co-steering. You put your wetsuit on, you run along the top of the cliff, and you jump in the water. Yes, and then you climb out, and you run along the top of the cliff, and you jump in the water. We've never lost one. They all do it, and when they come out, they're like, oh, I did it. It's so confidence building. Me, forget it. They all do it. Yasmin, forget it too. She didn't do it either. So that's really, it pushes their boundaries. It's full of, makes them feel really proud of themselves. That's really, really important. But they will also spend a couple of days with entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs who are successful in all kinds of fields. And so, one, you can be successful and young, and they tend to be in like cutting edge kind of industries. So, oh, I could do that. That's interesting. So the GCSE are doing that. The AS students are going to Imperial, and they're going to be about, I think there's 60 of them going, and they're going to be looking at things to do with medical courses and engineering. So you have to take advantage of everything we provide. You don't go home 2 weeks early because you want to see mum. You can see her 2 weeks later. Do this. This is of value. So admissions tests, mentors, work experience, take advantage of every single thing we offer. Grades get you to the door of the university. They do not get you through. It's the value added that gets you through. And we specialize in value added. It's so important, increasingly important.
Thank you very much。嗱，我簡單講，用廣東話，即係講咗好長，我驚我唔好記聲。其實我啱啱就問校長點樣可以考到英國一流嘅大學啦。其實個 procedure 咧，大家可能上網都睇到啦，有個叫 UCAS 嘅系統，係嘛，都係好似你上網申請呢個passport 咁簡單填資料嘅啫。咁但係點樣可以令到個學生叻啲咧？點樣真係可以入到校長劍橋咧？其實當中最緊要嘅就係要校長講就係要有熱誠，係嘛？咁啊點樣 showcase 到你熱誠啊？你點樣可以喺嗰份個人陳述裏面表現到？其實個個都會寫喺板紙㗎啦。係嘛？我有時見到啲香港學生都係話自己做班長啊、學琴啊，有幾多級啊，又做咗課外活動啊。其實個個都一式一樣，但係其實都表現唔到點解你適合做醫生或者做律師。但喺學校呢，佢哋原來第3個星期開始呢，就已經有不同嘅活動，令到學生有stimulate 咗佢哋嘅對呢個學科嘅興趣。譬如佢哋會去每個學生會有個 mentor 啦，可能係來自牛津啦、劍橋啦。咁啊，佢哋亦都會同佢即係好似有啲似香港嘅補習輔導咁啦，但係其實就係 inspire 佢哋嘅。咁令到學生咧及早咧就已經可以即係大概明白點樣同一個學者去溝通。咁將來去做面試咧，咁就冇咁擔心啦。咁另外我覺得有樣嘢幾得意嘅就係佢哋話，不過呢個我驚嚇親你哋。佢話其實放2個禮拜假都唔好翻香港啦，唔一定係淨係要掛住爹哋媽咪就翻去嘅啫。佢哋嘅學生咧去咗威爾斯。咁就做咗一啲叫做領袖訓練咁樣，就着住啲嗰啲救生衣跳崖咁樣，咁啊可能可以訓練下佢哋嘅great resilience 啊等等啦，同埋就係interview skills mentor， 但係最緊要嘅就係令到學生及早細個開始有熱誠啦。Very difficult to translate. Sorry. So second question I might have for you though is. In Hong Kong, when I see many of my candidates, they don't quite know by the age of 16 what they like to study for uni. Or sometimes they are passionate, of course, but they're passionate for law, for engineering, for economics, for everything, because they're quite capable. How do you help them?
Right. If you're an A-level student, you've probably got a pretty good idea of what you want to be, what you want to study at university and what your career is. So we put them into specific career groups. When you're GCSE, you get a completely comprehensive career education program. So it looks at everything. And over the course of the year, your interest in everything, something will emerge. Okay, we have guest speakers coming in to talk, and something will trick their imagination. They'll go, that's me, that's what I want to do. But it's perfectly normal to start year 12 and still not really have an idea, and to change your mind in year 12, as long as you're open to everything.
When do you think it's too late? Once you've done the A-levels?
Once you've chosen your A-levels, you are kind of on a path. But within choosing your A-levels, there's a huge range of things you can study at university, which is why we, right from the beginning, are checking in with our students. Is this what you want to do? And there's a little mantra. You change your mind, you tell us straight away. Because then we can make sure that you've got the best opportunity to go to the university and the course you want.
Super. 咁我就問校長，其實因為我都見好多學生最大嘅問題就係有時去到16歲嘅時候呢，唔係好知自己想讀啲咩科大學。我自己都係一個咁嘅學生，因為我其實轉咗好多次科，原本諗住讀 architect， 跟住又走咗去讀法律，跟住其實之前又想讀經濟，轉咗好多次科。咁好正常。咁我就問下學校究竟點樣可以幫到學生去選擇佢哋嘅興趣。咁佢就校長就話其實去到英國我哋嘅學制呢，就係 GCSE。咁 GCSE 其實已經係幫你篩選咗少少㗎啦，因為 GCSE 英國我哋讀10科嘅，係嘛？香港而家冇會考啦，以前可能都係讀8科啊7科，好似仲少啲係嘛？英國呢，又要讀外語，又要讀通常有科學，跟住有啲少 social science 10科嘅。咁但係10科裏面就唔係讀得好深嘅啫，好似一個目錄咁樣，你乜都試下。咁讀完個 GCSE 呢，校長就認為希望嗰陣時你已經大概知道自己有邊3科最中意，咁然後 A level 呢，就揀3個學科啦，係嘛？咁可能你原來係發覺自己中意科學嘅，咁你就揀 physics 啊、chemistry 啊等等等等，咁就由慢慢咁樣去收窄，由目錄去到3科，跟住就大學。咁通常去到 AS 嘅時候咧，你大概都知道自己想讀啲咩。咁但係學校仲有啲 extra 嘅方面幫到你嘅，就係佢會請好多出邊嘅人去講講座，好似一啲後生嘅 entrepreneur， 一啲成功嘅創業家或者係大學嘅講者啊入到嚟，希望學生及早咧就可能感受下究竟讀法律係要具備啲咩才能，或者讀醫係咪？有時我自己同啲學生傾都係咁講。如果你想知自己想讀醫中唔中意，你就咁打開個 YouTube， 其實而家 YouTube 乜都有，係咪？如果真係冇得入呢間學校或者去英國讀書嘅話，打開個 YouTube， 你打 Medicine 101 Lecture， 可能都揾到啲嘢出嚟睇。如果你坐喺度睇9個字你都覺得悶嘅話，你就唔好讀醫啦，係嘛？或者你買本書咁，不過雖然而家好少人睇書我知道，但係我好肯定，如果我對你口講話，我好想讀心理學啊。會唔好係因為你淨係睇一套劇集，覺得嗰個心理學家好有型，真係買本書揭下，唔需要你睇得明，唔好睇得悶就得啦。你肯睇落去都好，咁就慢慢收窄自己嘅興趣，去揀學科啦。
I was going to say for GCSE, work experience is important as well, because they think, I want to do that. And they come back 2 days later and go, never. Or that's my thing. So the work experience is really important. And when they go home for the summer, if they can get some work experience back home, wherever home is, that adds a really interesting dynamic for when they apply to university, because British kids will have work experience in Britain. International kids can demonstrate something extra if they've got work experience in Britain that they've got through school while they're at school, and then if they've got something from home, and that makes them a little bit unique and a little bit interesting and something to talk about. So we always encourage them to try and get some work experience when they go home during the summer.
That's perfect. 校長講得好好啊，佢就話暑期工啦，或者攞一啲工作經驗係好好嘅。雖然都好難話，即係翻到嚟香港就會去即刻去咗律師樓度做，但係我相信就算係1-2日去學習去見識下，就算去 court 睇下。或者同下即係就算你入唔到診所做，同一個醫生傾下偈咁樣，了解下嗰個工作係點樣都係好嘅。我細個我自己就係因為父母好想我做律師，我又覺得睇完呢個律政英雄覺得好型， 就讀咗法律。但係如果我細個真係了解過啊，入過去聽下，其實可能我就唔會轉科啦。所以我 Year One 係轉咗經濟啊。
Also, kids usually don't want to do work experience with mum and dad. And I always, because mum and dad usually own businesses, and I always say, on your UCAS form, when you apply to university, you don't put, I worked for mum and dad. You're naming the company you worked for, and it's a really good opportunity for them to use the resources they have access to, or mum and dad's best friend. And you don't put mum and dad's best friend, you put the name of the company. So sometimes they need persuading for that, but it's a really good opportunity they shouldn't miss.
Great, work experience, make sure that you know truly what your passion is, but any special technique as to how to present that onto a personal statement?
Universities, sometimes the work experience does not have to be relevant to what you want to do. It's the skills and qualities you demonstrate that they're interested in. So say you have a job at the local supermarket for 2 weeks in the summer, and they go, that was boring. What it showed was you made a commitment to something. You managed your time. You dealt with the public. You didn't get the sack. You demonstrated a certain range of skills that they're looking for.
So it's not quite exactly what you do. It's what you have learned from that experience.
Yes, what you learn and the skills that you have acquired. They are as equally as important.
就好似我啱啱所講，其實一個15、16歲嘅學生，你翻到嚟香港，冇人覺得你係應該入到去匯豐做高層係冇可能噶嘛。即係你係原來咧校長就話，其實做啲咩唔係重點，反而係你喺嗰件事裏面學咗啲咩嘢。嗱呢啲咧本地人咧喺佢哋嘅個人陳述裏面就表現得好過我哋亞洲人啦。佢哋作呢啲文章作得非常之好，真係。我有一次睇到咁犀利，我自己都想見下呢個人。佢想報經濟學，佢話點解我想讀經濟呢？因為曾經我有一次去柬埔寨嗰度就做就去旅行嘅，其實不過見到貧富懸殊好嚴重，跟住就寫到直情係政綱嚟嘅嗰個，佢想改變世界，呢個犀利喎。咁但係香港仔就都係我所講，成日都我學琴啊8級啊，我係班長啊，所以跟住班長有幾叻呢？就寫咗2版，咁其實冇用嘅。其實大學會知道一個班長係做啲咩㗎啦，其實你就算作得幾犀利都冇用。重點係可以係一個好少嘅experience， 你可以就咁坐咗喺間 Starbucks 嗰度，但係你嗰件事你係吸收咗啲咩？吸收咗啲咩？點解去令你覺得你想讀嗰個學科係呢個係更為重要嘅。Do you get this question a lot? Sometimes I have parents ask, because Oxford and Cambridge you can only pick one, right?
Yes.
So, how do you choose? They're both so brilliant.
They are. Look at the course. Okay? And all these, we've got international students. Look at the course. Look what's actually in the course. Is that what you want to do? But also key, look at how many places there are. So Cambridge Medicine is about 27.
27?
Yes. Oxford Medicine, about 14. Play the numbers game. Maths, Cambridge uses step papers, and Oxford has its own admissions tests. Your teachers will look, what are you good at? It's really important. So for very competitive courses, international kids do not have access to all the places. Cambridge and Oxford have many more medical places, but international kids are only eligible for so many. So it's really, really important. It's really important. Every child who goes for an interview on a competitive course, we debrief when they come back. Tell us about it. What did they ask? So the next student that's going next year or later in the year, we really have a lot of information as to how it's going to go. When kids go to Oxford for maths, they have to do maths in front of a panel. No pressure. And it's designed so that you can't finish it. They want to see what you will do when you get stuck. We practice that. We've got overqualified staff. We practice. you know. Our job is to get students to the university and the course they want. That's our job.
So it's safe to say you've got to pick data to less selective Oxbridge courses.
Yes.
And many of the maybe interview questions, etc.
But we get that from the students, you know what I mean? We don't have any special relationship. We just work really hard at making sure our kids have the best advantage. For medical students, a lot of places they have to do something called MMI, multi-mini interview. And they're on a little circuit. And at each station, they have to do something. My absolute favourite is you get, you know, Lego, the little plastic bricks?
Yep.
You get a picture of something, a little car, a tree, a house. No instructions and a pile of Lego. Build it. Or you might get a pile of Lego and instructions and you don't know what you're building. They're testing skills. We practice that. I love that day. We do all kinds of things. Everything that's come up we know on an MMI that year, the kids practice. They like that day. We practice everything that we know. We know if you're going to a particular university for a medical interview, whether it will be one-on-one, whether it will be panel, whether it will be scenario. We practice all of these things.
Super, thank you. 我就問校長個好簡單嘅問題話，個個都想報牛津劍橋，但係2間只能報1間嘅啫 UCAS， 咁點揀呢？哇，答得非常之好啊！原來真係要睇每個學科嚇。劍橋醫學院佢話有26個學位，原來但係牛津原來得14個嘅啫。咁學校咧，因為每年都幫學生報牛津劍橋啊、醫學院等等，咁佢哋好多 data， 無論係邊個學院比較難入啊，邊間學院可能收國際學生多少少啊，或者佢哋 interview 佢哋嘅面試問啲咩問題啊。難唔難？好得意喎！啲面試佢啱啱話有個 MMI mini multiple interview， 就唔係一個好似我哋平時面試一個人3個人望住你咁樣，原來係逐個見好似 speed dating 咁見不同嘅人，甚至乎係攞啲 Lego 出嚟玩。咁佢哋學校因為收到呢啲 data 啦，每年有呢啲學生會做呢樣嘢啦，咁就翻到學校喺 OIC 裏面咧就會做一個咁嘅 training 啦。今日時間有限啦，今日我校長又好，我又好，今日咧就會喺1號房同埋2號房嘅。咁就繼續，如果你哋有啲咩問題想問呢，可以即同我哋嘅同事去約。咁啊，校長有好多貼士啊，佢話知道牛津劍橋邊一個學系係最容易入嘅，話你啲貼士真係要攞，所以大家即係我都想問佢啊，係啊，犀利，非常犀利。Kim, so we're going to be in room 1, room 2. There may be opportunities for questions later.
Fine,
Thank you so much for coming.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Kim and Samuel.
首先好多謝 HSBC 今日邀請我哋 Crimson Education 過嚟同大家做一個分享啦，咁亦都好開心我哋邀請到前哈佛嘅招生官 Devery 過嚟香港呢度同大家見面嘅。咁好似頭先 MC Yancy 咁樣講啦，咁其實我哋最主要今日亦都會想同大家去講多少少關於美國去升大學嘅 preparation 啦，或者咩 top tips 啦。咁一陣間我哋都準備咗唔同嘅 slides 同埋啲 case study 想同大家分享嘅。咁首先可以介紹下我自己先啦。咁我係 Jonathan 啦。咁 Crimson Education 呢一邊其中一個 academic advisor 啦。咁我自己個 background 咧，其實大部分都喺英國嗰邊嘅。咁我由 Year 9開始喺英國讀 boarding school 啦，咁去到讀大學啦，我喺 Lancaster 嗰邊讀 French and Linguistics 啦。咁之後喺呢一行其實都一段時間啦。咁但係當然今日最重要咧，就係有 Devery 特登喺美國飛過嚟同大家見面啦。佢自己亦都喺 Harvard 嗰度讀 undergrad 啦，之後去咗 UT Austin 嗰度讀佢嘅 MBA。咁亦都喺 Harvard 嗰度做前招生主任啦。咁亦都喺 UC Berkeley 嗰度咧，亦都係做 admissions reader 嘅。咁佢自己喺呢一行亦都有超過15年嘅時間，幫過好多唔同嘅學生。咁所以今日我諗最主要佢嘅參與啦，咁亦都可以同大家去分享多少少，究竟喺呢一行入面佢有啲乜嘢 insights， 或者 based on 佢即係 first hand experience， 亦都可以同大家分享多少少。咁將個時間 pass 俾 Devery 之前啦，咁亦都可以同大家介紹多少少關於 Crimson Education 嘅 background。咁其實我哋而家係全世界最大做 premium consultancy 嘅公司啦，咁喺全世界亦都有超過20個唔同嘅 offices 嘅。咁我哋嗰個形式啦，咁就會係成個 teaching team 咧有超過2400位老師，因為我哋嗰個 model 咧其實就會係喺唔同嘅範疇有唔同嘅老師去幫手，因為始終每一個人個 expertise 喺唔同嘅位置嗰度嘅。 咁呢一度我哋就會講少少究竟大學佢哋嘅要求會係啲乜嘢啦。如果我哋去講美國嘅，咁其實咧佢哋會睇住一個 T-shape profile， 意思即係話佢哋 focus on 個 breadth 同埋個 depth 嘅。首先要證明你有試過啲乜嘢唔同嘅部分啦 ，academic 同埋 non-academic， 咁之後就會係你自己個 depth 啦。究竟你揀咗去做邊一科，咁你有啲乜嘢去證明到你個能力啦，或者個興趣等等嘅。咁而呢一度就會見到3個其實大學最主要會睇嘅部分，包括當然你嘅 academic 啦，咁另外就係你嘅 extracurricular activities 同埋你嘅 leadership skills， 而最後咧就會係你個 passion 啦，咁或者 in another words， 究竟你個 personal brand 係啲乜嘢？你比其他學生有啲乜嘢咁唔同嘅地方去證明到其實除咗 academic 之外，究竟你個興趣可能會係 music 啊、sports、community services 定係 social issues 嗰個部分嗰度嘅。咁呢度我哋就會集合咗咁多年嚟，其實 Crimson 幫過所有嘅學生啦，咁包括當然我哋呢一度擺咗 Ivy League Schools 啦，咁同埋亦都會幫學生去申請英國嘅大學嘅，咁所以 Oxbridge 嗰個成績亦都會擺咗喺呢度，可以俾大家去參考翻。咁當然如果你話我哋最 up to date 嘅 stat 啦，咁呢一度就會見到係我哋今個 cohort 攞到 offer 嘅學生數量嚟嘅。咁呢一度其中一個我會想 highlight， 譬如會係 UPenn 啦，咁譬如香港好多學生都會申請 UPenn Wharton 啦。咁每一年其實 UPenn 咧佢哋會出2000個 offer， 咁有300個咧其實會係 international students 嘅 offer 嚟嘅。咁而 Crimson 嘅學生咧其實就會佔咗8點幾個 percent。咁所以簡單嚟講咧，呢300個入面其實有20幾個 out of 我哋呢一度見到嘅40幾個就會係 Crimson 嘅學生嚟㗎啦。咁所以過去呢幾年雖然我哋會受到疫情嘅影響啦，咁但係因為 Crimson 我哋所有都係 online 咁樣去進行，咁所以反而我哋咁多年嚟咧，今年係我哋最好收生嘅成績嚟嘅。咁所以度亦都可以同大家去參考一下。咁好快講一講我哋今日會去 cover 嘅部分啦。咁當然會去講而家我哋最新美國收生嘅 admission trends 啦。咁第二啦就會係 Deborah 可以講多少少究竟我哋遞交咗申請表之後啦，會發生啲乜嘢事嘅咧？喺behind the scene 嘅一啲嘅 secrets， 咁一陣 Deborah 都可以去 go through 啦。咁第三就係而家比較 hit 啲嘅 topic 啦 ，AI 同埋 ChatGPT 究竟對於申請有啲乜嘢影響啦？因為而家都有好多唔同嘅 rumors 啊或者 myths 啊，咁呢我哋都會 prepare 咗同大家去講多少少啦。咁而最後咧亦都會準備咗我哋其中一啲香港嘅 successful 嘅 case study 去同大家分享究竟，譬如你哋嘅師兄師姐究竟過去呢幾年我哋係點樣去幫佢啦？咁而最後佢亦都會入到 top schools。咁去到最後面咧，如果有時間亦都會可以去回答一啲 Q&A 嘅部分嘅。咁我哋同時亦都會準備咗一啲 folder 俾大家啦。咁嗰陣時喺入面你就會見到，其實如果想的話咧，我哋之後亦都可以安排翻一個 free consultation 嘅時間。咁可以喺翻我哋銅鑼灣嘅 office 啦，或者喺 Zoom 嗰邊去見面。咁我哋到時就可以好 detail 咁樣去同大家去 go through 翻究竟你個小朋友自己 academic 同埋 non-academic 個 background 去邊一個位置啦，同埋個 candidacy 嗰個部分啦。咁因為始終 Deborah 佢會英文為主啦。咁所以一陣間會喺每一個 section 嘅後面呢，我都會去再做少少補充。咁希望大家成件事可以再 interactive 同埋 engaging 一啲嘅。咁我而家暫時會將時間交俾 Deborah。
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. As John said, my name is Deborah Duran. I am a former Harvard admissions officer. I've read applications for Berkeley. I've worked as a college counselor at a top 5 independent school in the US, and for the last 15 years I've been helping students get into their dream universities. My focus is really to help students be introspective, to really think about their fit at a university and not just the ranking. So I'm always excited to share insight and really help families understand this nebulous process just a little bit more. All right, so today we're going to talk about some overall trends that we've been noticing over the last few years. I'm going to talk a bit about early applications, just the dramatic increase in early applications in the States, the overall lower acceptance rates in the top 50 universities in the US, what exactly test optional means these days, a little bit about ChatGPT, and a bit more about the importance of essay questions. All right, so for those of you that don't know, in the US, there are typically 2 rounds of admissions, early admissions and regular admissions. So early admissions is typically a November 1 deadline, while regular decision is really around January 1st. And there are 2 types of early applications. There's early decision and early action. Early decision is a binding agreement. So there are about 450 colleges in the US that use early decision. And you might say, this is my top university, I really want to go here. And so what you do is you enter into a contract with that university, you apply, your parents sign a document, you sign a document, your school signs a document saying, if I'm admitted, I'm gonna go, right? So it increases your chances of being admitted because you're saying yes to them straight away. So there's this early decision, but that's not for everyone and not all schools have that. So there's also early action. Same timeline, you apply around November 1st, you typically find out or hear from them around December 15th, but the difference there is it's not a contract. So you could be admitted, but you don't have to go ultimately. All right, so what we have seen over the last few years is an increase in the number of early applications. A lot of this is due to the fact that I think COVID, mostly because of COVID, and families really desiring a little bit more security and honestly knowing where they're going to be able to attend. So definitely an increase in these early applications, but also because colleges went test optional and students, who had great grades and were really busy with their activities said, I'm gonna go ahead and go for this because I don't have to worry about this testing component anymore. So we are continuing to see an increase in applications. This year, I think it leveled out a little bit, but as you can see, overall admissions rates are still pretty low at these top universities, at these Ivy League institutions, at places like Duke and Northwestern as well. So while it's not gonna go down probably too much more, it's not gonna really it's not gonna increase very much either. So just something we want to note here is that you can definitely see that early applications have a statistical advantage. Early decision is really the round where you benefit the most, again, because of that contractual agreement. That college knows they're going to yield you, and they worry about yield because it affects their rank, it affects their numbers, and so on. Early action is also a great way to increase your chances, but it's less of a statistical advantage. Right, and every student's gonna be different. You really wanna make the decision that is right for you, and there's a lot of strategy and thought that goes into when and where you decide to apply early. But I definitely recommend you do apply early. One of the trends that we've also noticed in the last couple years is that schools who have early decision have also decided to do a second round of early decision. So in case your first round didn't work out, let's say you applied early decision to Duke, and you applied November 1st, they told you December 15th you weren't admitted, then they denied you, then you could apply to another school early decision too if you had a second choice. So you could apply to Boston University, early decision 2, and the same rules apply. It's just a later deadline. So you'd apply January 1st, you'd hear back February 15th, and if you were admitted, you'd be done with the process, and that's where you would be attending. Schools that have early programs, they are admitting anywhere from a third of their students to up to half of their students. So it's definitely a smaller pool of students. You definitely are more likely to be admitted. You still have to be a very strong applicant. So you want to be very thoughtful, again, about where you're applying. Because early applications have increased, that also means deferrals have increased. So in the early round, you can be admitted, you can be denied, or you can be deferred. If you're deferred, that means your application is going to be read again in that regular January round. So you can update your application with any new information that's come in since you actually submitted. So just kind of note that that's actually something that is happening. So definitely have a plan B in case you find yourself in that position. Okay. Also, something I want to note is that it's not just the Ivies and your top 20 schools that have really dramatically decreased in terms of admissions rates. It's schools that once had 30 to 40% acceptance rates that are now down to 8, 10, 15%. NYU, Boston University, and Boston College are universities that are amazing, but I think it has been very shocking to some families that these are no longer kind of target universities for students. These are reach universities, and it's not something you can use as a backup. It's something you have to be very intentional about if you're going to actually apply to these schools. So we can't just assume, we can't just pick a top 20 or a top 50 and say, all right, we're only applying to these colleges. We have to really make sure when you as a student are putting your list together that you are choosing schools that you're excited about, schools that you've done your research on, schools where you can really imagine yourself there as a student, yes, of course, but also as a community member, as somebody who is going to be involved outside of the classroom as well, because that's what the admissions officers are looking at. They're trying to make sure you're actually going to add value outside of the classroom, not just inside of the classroom. And let's talk a little bit about test optional. So do you actually have to take the SAT or ACT, and do we recommend it? So beginning in 2020, because of COVID, you couldn't take the SAT anymore. It wasn't digital yet. Colleges couldn't actually require that you take it. So almost every college in the US became test optional. For the most part, most colleges have remained test optional and have agreed to stay test optional for at least the next couple of admission cycles. However, there are colleges now, a few of them, and a few notable ones, that are requiring testing once again. So if you're interested in MIT, if you are interested in Georgetown, if you're interested in Georgia Tech or Purdue starting next year, these are colleges that require the SAT or ACT. So if you do not take it, you will not be considered for admission. So I want to kind of put that out there. Colleges are test optional, they truly are. However, it does not hurt you to take the SAT or ACT because you don't have to submit your scores if you don't like them. That's kind of the one saving grace of schools being test optional, is that if your scores aren't where they need to be, if they're not in the top 50th percentile of what that school typically admits, which they publish those numbers every year. So if you're not in the top 50th percentile for Harvard, you wouldn't have to submit those SAT scores. But maybe your scores are in the top 50th percentile for Boston College, and so you can submit them there. So you can pick and choose where you send them. I would definitely plan on taking the SAT or ACT, take some practice exams, figure out which is the better test for you. Colleges really don't care which one you take. And plan on taking it a couple of times because you can super score and put together your best subsections together to have an even better score. And it's nice for admissions officers to have that additional academic metric when they're looking at your application, because they are desperate for additional academic evidence, additional evidence that you can handle the workload as a student. So especially if you aren't doing an international curriculum, for example, it gives them that little bit more of evidence for them to know that you can do the work. So if everybody at your school is submitting an SAT score, you should probably plan on taking it as well, because it can really only be helpful. And if it's optional, then you don't have to submit it if your scores aren't where they need to be. All right, ChatGPT. So this is all new, right? This is all new, and it gets a little bit smarter every day. So colleges are going to figure out ChatGPT a little bit on the fly, as they like to do. But basically what will happen with ChatGPT and any other AI like this is that colleges are going to end up having probably some type of honor code, right, when you submit your application, which is what they do now anyway. They say what I have submitted is my own work, right? So they want to make sure your English teacher didn't write your essay, and it's going to be the same thing here. They want to make sure AI didn't write your essay for you. So you'll likely have to sign some type of honor code, totally fine. But they might also add a couple of other things as requirements. So for the last couple of years, Princeton has required that students submit a graded paper, like a couple-page paper, history, English, with comments from a teacher. And they've been doing that because they want to see how the student actually writes. But they also wanted to compare it to make sure that the student's voice is really their voice and those are their words. So I expect more and more colleges to start to do that, or have some type of supplemental material that they want students to submit. That could be they actually push video interviews a little bit more if they're not already doing it. That could be additional portfolio materials. It could be that they want most students to submit, actually submit research submit supplements and graded papers. We'll have to wait and see. But you are definitely going to have to sign something that says, this is my own work. And honor codes are incredibly important in the US. Like, it is really hard to get kicked out of Harvard. You can do a lot of things and they'll just keep maybe suspending you. But if you violate the honor code, you're done. So honor code is very serious. You want to make sure that your work is your own work and you don't really want to mess with that. All right, and essay questions. So because testing became optional, colleges definitely they've always been pretty purposeful in the questions that they're asking, but they definitely tried to ask questions that would help them understand the students a little bit more and get to know them even more, because personal qualities are very important, but I think they hold a little extra weight when you're looking for some additional kind of metrics. So selective colleges in the US practice holistic admissions, meaning they're looking at the whole student. So they're looking, yes, of course, at academics, but also extracurriculars with an emphasis on leadership, the impact students are having in their activities, and of course, personal qualities and how the student represents themselves and if they can be introspective. So a lot of questions that are being asked in college supplemental essays include ways of understanding kind of a student's perspective and their worldview, how they might handle being around someone who has a different perspective, how they might convince someone, how they are able to change their mind and be flexible, how they handle disagreements, what they care about, what they believe in. So they really are trying to get to the root of what is important to this student. So it is even more important for students to demonstrate that they have a concern for others, that they care for others, but that they also know themselves and they know why they are doing things. They know what they want to study and why. They know why they're a part of their activities. They're really, really pushing students to get to know themselves a bit more, and you can really see it in these essay questions. All right, so a couple things that I think we can kind of safely kind of predict for the next couple of seasons. Grades are incredibly important, especially if not everybody is submitting test scores. Grades have always been incredibly important, but there's really a push, I think, even at public institutions now to really be focusing on grades, to really be focusing on those essay questions. Definitely early decision or early action have become kind of the new regular application. So you don't have to apply early decision somewhere if there's not a school that you want to do that at, but you do need to apply early. So you need to have your application together. You need to be ready to do this in order to have the best opportunity, the best chances of being admitted. I think this one is up for debate, I think, among admissions officers, but I do believe that legacy continues to remain important. Legacy meaning that if your parents went to an institution, sometimes if your extended family members went to an institution, that you will get your application will get a second look. It has a little bit more weight in the process. This tends to not be true at public institutions like UC Berkeley, UCLA, all of the University of California schools actually they won't look at legacy, and they actually are test blind and they don't look at SAT or ACT, but almost every private college will look at legacy. And I think it's important to also note, I forgot to say this, is that there are going to be a lot of creative opportunities and a lot of essays. So you can actually, with some colleges, you can actually do a short recording, you can do something creative that you submit, and if that is your style, if that is your vibe, definitely go for it. Don't feel like you have to write an essay if they're giving you an option to do a recording and that's a way that you can really shine. Try to help yourself stand out if that's a way that's going to strengthen your application.
Here comes a little summary. Thank you. 咁頭先 Jeffrey 都有提及到啦，咁其實而家 即係最 latest 嘅 admission trend 咧，當然而家美國大學越嚟越難入啦。咁譬如講緊唔係淨係 Ivy League schools 嘅，咁可能我哋講緊 even top 30、top 50嘅大學會越嚟越難入。咁所以點解其實我哋自己有啲家長咧都會係自己係 Ivy 畢業啦，咁但係佢都會揾我哋去幫手，就係譬如而家對於 SAT 或者 ACT 個要求會更加高啦。我自己有個學生咧，其實佢 ACT 最近36分滿分，佢考咗33分，但係佢嚟緊暑假咧，即使佢去美國其中間大學會讀6個星期嘅 summer school 啦，咁但係佢亦都仍然要安排喺嗰邊再去重考佢嗰個 ACT 嘅，因為佢 aim for super top schools。咁另外當然亦都會係 ChatGPT 啦。咁頭先 Deborah 亦都講到，有機會其實大學咧佢哋亦都需要學生去簽翻一份文件去證明翻其實係冇用到呢一啲 external 嘅 system 去寫佢哋嘅文章啦。咁成件事係需要係由佢哋自己去出發去寫成篇文嘅。咁而最後當然係講緊即係未來嘅趨勢啦。咁亦都會有唔同嘅大學亦都開始去用緊，唔係淨係話 personal essay 啦、short questions 同埋 short essays 嘅形式嘅，亦都會係去透過可能學生要去拍一啲嘅短片啦。咁呢個亦都會喺佢哋嗰個 early action、early decision， 通常會10月、11月截止啦。咁或者喺 regular round 1月份嘅時候呢，咁就再去做一個收生嘅標準。咁所以點解呢一個就會係其中一個好重要嘅策略？究竟我哋喺 early round 嘅時候去報邊一間嘅學校去做啦？咁跟住我哋就會由 Deborah 去講一講，究竟我哋遞交咗個 application 之後呢，其實 admissions officers 佢哋喺個 office 嗰度點樣去 review 每一個 application， 同埋中間有啲乜嘢討論要去做啦。
All right. Now I want to share a little bit about how decisions are made, or and some of my own experience as a former Harvard admissions officer. Okay, so as I mentioned, selective institutions are practicing holistic admissions. Okay, so they are looking at that whole student. Typically, when they are looking at applications, the first thing they're going to look at is that transcript, right? That's 3.5 years of work versus a couple of Saturday mornings for testing. So that is the evidence where they get to see, have you challenged yourself in the classes that are available to you? Have you done well in those classes? And have you taken a good number of English and social sciences and math throughout the years? The thing about academics at selective institutions is that the majority of students applying, 85% or so is what Harvard estimated, are academically qualified. So they have great grades, they've taken challenging classes, their test scores are within range. So it's pretty rare that academics are what get a student in, right? If that's really all that a student is doing, I'll show you a slide shortly that kind of explains this, but it's really not going to be what gets a student in, because it doesn't help you stand out, because everybody has strong academics. So it's truly those extracurriculars and those personal qualities that tend to help a student stand out. These colleges are building community. Harvard is a residential college. You live on campus all 4 years. When I meet an alum from Harvard, one of the first things, how I introduce myself is, my name's Deborah Duran. I was class of 2007. I lived in Lowell House. Lowell House, that's like a huge part of my Harvard identity. That's where I lived, and that was a big piece of my social network, how I spent my time, and my whole experience there. So they want students who are going to add to community, who are going to be a part of this community, be a part of extracurriculars, are going to share their unique perspectives in class and outside of the classroom. So they really care about what students are doing outside of the classroom, because they want that to translate at Harvard. And they care who you are as a person, because you're somebody's roommate, you're someone's lab partner, you're someone's teammate, and they want to make sure you're, generally pretty nice, right? That you are going to be open, that you're there to be, you're flexible, you're there to learn, you're curious, and so on. As a quick aside, I was actually a residential proctor for a year while I was an admissions officer, meaning I actually lived in a first-year dormitory, and I was a live-in advisor. I was a residential advisor for first-year students. So I was literally living with the decisions that I had made. I had admitted these students, and now I had to live with them. So I can tell you it is incredibly important to be admitting students that you want to be around, and many admissions officers actually also served as residential proctors at some point in their career at Harvard. So it really matters that the student's voice comes through, that we get a sense of who they are in their application, and that we can truly imagine them on campus. All right, so at Harvard, and honestly most institutions, Admissions officers read regionally, they read geographically. So a person becomes an expert on certain areas. So at Harvard, there's like one person who reads Hong Kong. There's one person who reads mainland China. There's one person who reads, a part of California, and it's somebody who reads another part. These people really get to know the schools, they get to know the local curriculum, they get in touch with with high school counselors, they often visit so that they can get to know the area. But they do this so they can, compare students to students and make sure they're looking at students in the context of where they're coming from. So, they're gonna read all of Hong Kong together because they're not gonna be comparing students in Hong Kong to students in South Texas, right? That is a different lived experience. So they do this geographic grouping. They then come together in a committee process and they actually make decisions together. So it's a group of admissions officers who will decide whether or not a student is admitted, a student is waitlisted, or a student is denied or deferred in some cases. Every admissions officer at Harvard has one vote. Even the dean doesn't actually get to say, I'm gonna just push this person in, or I don't want this person. It is truly it's truly one vote per person, which I think is pretty neat. So you have this one person who is your advocate, this one person who pushes for you, this one person who's going to check your application a couple times, see if you've sent any information to update your application, and they are the person that's going to push. Something that's important to note also, that admissions is an art and not a science. It is a subjective process. These are human people that are reading your application. They try their best to, they really do try their best to think about the university's needs, the institutional needs of the university, but they're also, thinking about, again, is the student going to add value in the classroom, outside of the classroom, and as an alum in the future. They're trying to really look for reasons to admit students. There are no cutoffs or quotas. There's no perfect equation that gets any one student in. It truly is a very individual process. Admissions officers at Harvard look for reasons to admit students, not reasons to deny them. Even though that admissions rate is low, they are truly looking for reasons to admit students. Okay, and this is what I want to talk about briefly about academics. So as a result of, maybe you've heard about some of the admissions lawsuits that have been happening in the US over the last few years, this is actually a ranking sheet from Harvard that is now in the public domain as a result of this lawsuit. So Harvard doesn't have equations, right? So you don't get 10 points for having a perfect 1600 on your SAT, and another 10 points for having a 4.0, and another 10 points for being president of your class, and then if it all adds up to 50, you get in. That's not how it works. It really is holistic. You're looking, again, at the whole student. But they use these numbers in order to have just a quick reference when they're looking at students to be like, oh yeah, if this student is a 2 academic, I know that they have A's and that they probably have a 34 on the ACT. Right? So it's just meant to give them a really quick reference point. I think a lot of people think a student who, gets into Harvard, gets into these selective institutions, has to be this number one, has to be this genuine scholar who has near perfect grades, has all 800s, and has done research. That is actually not the truth. And on this next slide, this is 6 years of information. These are 6 years of applicants, and you'll actually see that profile number 1, those true academic students, only 650 of them even applied over a 6-year period. So it's really hard to actually be a true academic, right? It's not just 800s. That doesn't actually make you a true academic. It's intellectual curiosity. It's, do professors really, are professors talking about you? Do they want to work with you? Do you have published work, real published work that scientists, that economists are talking about? It is very hard to be a true academic. The majority of students that are admitted to Harvard are not those academics. They are that number 2. They are those students who are good students, those students who have A's, who have challenged themselves, and who have solid scores. So just want you to note that, because academics almost never are going to be the one thing that get you in. They are a given in this process. You need to be strong, but everything else has to be strong as well. You really cannot put extracurriculars on the side and say you'll get back to it. You can't wait to get to know yourself either as a student. You need to start asking yourself why, start having intention and purpose in the activities that you're a part of. That's really, really important. Just a quick spotlight on extracurriculars. Extracurriculars can be challenging for a lot of students, because I know it can be overwhelming, and I get so many questions about, well, how many do I need to have, and what exactly should they be, and if I'm president, is that enough, or do I have to do, Olympiad and, be at the national level? Every student is different, and I really do mean that every student has different strengths, every student has different passions, enjoys different things. Some students are going to be well-rounded. Some students are going to be more lopsided. Maybe they're more STEM-focused. Maybe they're more humanities-focused. If you are applying to colleges that are really selective, like Harvard, like Penn, they are going to be looking for students who have gone kind of above and beyond the norm, who have taken something to the next level, who have actual impact in their activities. So they can point to something and say, this is how I made this better, or this is how I did something really well, or, this is kind of my lasting legacy in a way. Like, I started this organization and it's gonna stay running when I go to college. Or, yeah, I do have national or international recognition. Or I took initiative and I started something, I started my own thing, and I've been able to reach a population that hasn't been reached before. I know that seems extreme, but in this environment, in this type of competition, that is what we are seeing. So just kind of something I wanna put out there, as it is really important to start thinking about your activities early and not wait to try to piece them together when you are 17 or 18 and about to start applying.
咁好快一個 quick summary 啦。咁其實頭先 Deborah 都有講咗，其實我諗最主要嘅一個 idea 想同大家去講呢，就會係你交咗個 application 之後呢，其實每一個地區呢就會有一啲同事喺 Harvard 嗰度或者唔同嘅大學啦，去負責去睇你個 application 嘅。咁所以其實最重要嗰個目的就係要等佢係願意幫你去 fight， 佢願意幫你去將你個 application 拎到去個 final stage 嗰度去俾大家去投票。咁所以其中一個 strategy 就係好重要，點樣令到一個唔識你嘅人去願意去幫你，會覺得你係比較獨一無二。咁所以頭先亦都我哋睇到啦，相對比較 academic 嘅學生係有嘅，咁但係佢哋個 admission rate 亦都未必會係最高，而反而就係你自己究竟有啲乜嘢比較 proactive， 你係自己由你出發嘅 initiative 成件事去做 rather than 係一個 follower 或者一個 participant 咁樣嘅角色。咁呢一個對於美國嘅大學嚟講呢，就會係一個相對比較重要嘅 concept 嚟嘅，因為 again 我哋要睇翻個 T-shape profile 嗰個部分。咁可能在座有啲嘅家庭亦都會考慮英國啦，咁英國佢哋就會相對會係 focus 係 I-shape profile 嘅，成件事好 academic。咁所以頭先可能我哋 profile 1嘅學生呢，有機會佢哋去報英國呢，佢嘅機會會比較大啲嘅。咁而我哋其實亦都會去幫學生去報唔同嘅國家，咁所以呢個亦都會係一啲少少嘅 information 可以同大家去分享翻。咁但係當然今日我哋就會 focus 係講美國多少少嘅。
So we've kind of touched on this, right? So will AI and ChatGPT reshape university admissions? And it will, to some degree. How that's going to look, we're not quite sure, but I know there's going to definitely be some type of honor code. I'm pretty sure that they're going to start asking for additional information, additional maybe essays, interviewing, video recordings, and so on. So just be prepared that might be popping up in the near future. All right. I'll answer this in general. What concerns might Harvard or other colleges have about AI potentially giving an unfair advantage to students who maybe can afford or are able to use certain tools? And I think in general, especially at Harvard, Harvard is looking at a student in the context of where they're coming from. So that's why they also ask so much information. They have recommendation letters, they have a space on the application where you can add additional context. You can talk about maybe your class schedule not working out. You can talk about something going on at home. You have space to actually let them know more about you. because they really do want to understand any limitations that you've had. They want to know how you've been able to make the most of your situation, whatever it may be. So certain students have always had access to more than others, right? And so Harvard's not looking to see exactly, is every student going on a summer program? Is every student, have perfect 800s? They know that certain students have access to test prep, have, more means and can do things. So they're not comparing a student from a certain background to a student from another background. And so it's going to be the same thing with this. They're going to try to look at that student and look at the distance that student has traveled, meaning, if you have a student who, starts here because both of their parents went to college and they understand the process, they've gone to good schools, they start here, where you might have a student who starts here because they're the first in their family to go to college, they're figuring it out on their own. Maybe their test scores end up being like right here, and this student is right here, but the distance that second student traveled is much greater than this student. So that's kind of that's the mindset that a lot of these colleges are taking. They're trying to make sure that you have made the most of what is available to you. You've gone above and beyond whatever that is. And as AI becomes more sophisticated, colleges are going to have to figure it out, right? They're going to figure it out. I know pretty quickly after ChatGPT was launched in the fall that a student at Princeton had come up with a way to actually detect it. I suspect there will be many more students out there that continue to do that.
咁頭先都有講到啦 ，AI 同埋 ChatGPT， 咁當然對於去寫一啲嘅 personal essay 嗰啲嘅幫助會係好大。咁但係大學其實佢哋會 focus 多少少咧，就係成個 journey， 究竟學生會由佢自己一個起步點，去到佢而家個位置，究竟佢有幾願意去 challenge 佢自己啦，又去做幾多係 out of 佢哋 standard curriculum 嘅部分啦。咁當然我哋都會覺得 ChatGPT 可能喺個 essay writing 上面嘅嘢可以幫到手多少少。咁但係始終成個 profile 會比較 holistic 咁樣去睇。咁所以有時譬如佢講緊我哋會幫學生去揾嘅 internship 嘅機會啦，或者去 prepare 去做唔同嘅 competitions 啦，有啲可能係計數 base 㗎啦，或者甚至去做一啲嘅 leadership 嘅 project 啦。其實好多亦都未能夠係俾 ChatGPT 去代替到嘅。咁所以點解當然好似Defrick 頭先都有提及，好似 UPenn 咁樣，有啲學生或者有啲教授其實亦都開始會做翻一啲唔同嘅 system 去 track 翻究竟學生有冇用到 ChatGPT。咁所以嚟緊亦都會有唔同嘅趨勢。咁但係呢個亦都會係成個 admissions procedure 咧，其實每一年亦都會有唔同嘅變化。咁所以呢一個喺 Crimson 我哋就會一路去同大家去 update 唔同嘅 information 啦，亦都等大家去知道最新嘅 trend 會係點樣去行嘅。咁嚟緊呢一度我哋就會準備咗一個我哋自己香港嘅學生，亦都入到唔同嘅 top schools。咁 Defrick 都會講少少佢自己個 profile 啦，或者我哋點樣去幫到佢，俾大家去參考一下嘅。
And I'm just going to briefly talk about a student from Hong Kong that our Crimson Hong Kong office worked with this last year. And, this student was a great student. The student was a strong academic student. They are doing a full IB diploma program. They have very good testing, and they even have some pretty good accolades in terms of their activities. But when they came to us, they were a little bit scattered. They didn't really know how to focus on their extracurriculars, and they weren't really sure with how to actually develop them a bit more. But when we were finished with this student and helped them put their application together and really think about their activities and how to take it to the next level, they were admitted to Yale, UC Berkeley, and Oxford, which is pretty great options. You can see the full IB schedule this student was taking. And then here are some awards where we notice the student has a lot of entrepreneurial endeavors, was, kind of best in their class in multiple subjects, was really kind of pushing themselves, which, in the social sciences a bit more than the sciences, which we noticed were most of their higher levels. And then we look at their activities, and we can see that from early on, about 9th grade, the student was really only doing soccer, but doing soccer at a very high level, playing semi-professionally, playing for the national team, very exciting. But you weren't really spending any time kind of developing their academic interests. And so that's where Crimson really came in to help the student think about, what they valued and how they could take, how they could get more involved. So this student really had a very strong commitment to social justice and income inequality, and Crimson was able to help the student get a government-approved charity going that actually helped serve underprivileged communities. The student was also able to really start to explore their entrepreneurial interests and, as you saw, compete and place at some of these top entrepreneurial competitions, including one at Columbia. So Crimson was really able to help the student put together this theme, kind of put together this cohesive narrative in their application that wasn't there before. This is a great, well-rounded student, but had they not started to focus a little bit more in their later years in high school, I don't really see this application as something that would have come together. So Crimson really helped by helping the student find their voice, act on what was important to them, really find a spike, like kind of find that edge that gives the admissions officer something to talk about, something to hold on to, and helped them develop their extracurriculars so that they had leadership, they could demonstrate their initiative, and they could leave a lasting impact.
咁當我譬如每日嘅工作去接觸家庭啦，去做 consultations 嘅時候啦，咁其實 typically 有好多問題其實係香港家庭會去問嘅。咁呢度我哋亦都 include 咗幾個問題喺度，咁亦都可以等 Deftry 喺現場可以去解答大家啦。咁第一條問題啦，咁當然就會去講多少少，譬如 as 香港人或者 as 一個亞洲嘅學生啦，咁其實會唔會喺去報美國嘅大學嘅時候，相對嗰個機會比較細啲呢？因為可能亦都會有啲 norm 係每一間學校會有唔同嘅 quota 去俾唔同國籍嘅學生。咁譬如 Deftry 你自己會唔會覺得譬如呢一個 myth 會係真嘅呢？或者甚至in terms of 個 quota 或者有啲乜嘢 bias 其實係一般係會由 admissions officers 會睇 Asian students 或者 even 係可能係non-Asians 或者係 European students 咁樣呢？
So, I can guarantee there are absolutely no quotas in the admissions process. There are not. Harvard and other institutions are trying to make sure that there are diverse voices on their campus, but diverse in every sense of the word, right? Yes, international and domestic, students from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different students from different religious, ethnic, gender identifying, all over the world who are studying different things, do different activities. They truly want a diverse population. And so they are trying to build this overall community. What they do try to do is they would like their actual student body to be representative of the number of applications, or really the population that is the population that they're seeing. So, ideally, they would have 5% of their applicants be from 5% of their admits be from the state of Texas, because that's their overall admissions rate. Ideally, they would have kind of be 5% across the board. But they are also they have different institutional needs every year. They've had a big endeavor to increase the number of students who need financial aid. They have really tried to grow certain programs, especially engineering and CS, over the last few years. So they sometimes, are, depending on the year, might hear from the orchestra that they need oboes and double bass players, and they have over 40 varsity sports teams that they have to fill. So they have all of these different institutional needs that they have to consider when they're building a class. But there are no quotas. There absolutely are not. They would love for the population to really reflect that of the world. And so I just kind of really want to make that clear. They want to admit students who know themselves, students who are going to add to the overall community.
咁其實當然講緊個 bias 嗰度啦，咁其實 Deftry 頭先都有講，其實佢哋係冇咁樣去分，因為最主要就係去睇翻緊學生 究竟佢有啲乜嘢咁特別？咁始終一個 mixture of class， 佢哋都會想有一個 mixture of nationality 啦，或者一個 mixture of 你自己嘅 interest 同埋個 passion。咁所以點解 again 美國佢哋就會相對比較 holistic 咁樣去睇翻成件事。咁所以如果你話即使係我哋用香港或者係可能唔同亞洲嘅 passport 去申請呢，亦都唔會係直接影響咗你嗰個機會嘅。咁我哋之前亦都會有好多 even 係拎住香港 passport 嘅學生，亦都入到唔同 Ivy League 嘅學校嘅。咁另外一條問題啦，好多學生譬如佢哋都會讀緊係 international schools 或者行緊 international 嘅 curriculum 啦。究竟佢留喺香港去讀 high school 會比較對於大學個機會會比較大啲，入到好嘅大學，定係話去英國或者美國去讀 boarding school 呢？咁所以譬如頭先嗰個問題啦，咁亦都係講翻，如果佢哋亦都會有美國或者加拿大嘅 passport 啦，亦都會唔會幫到成件事？究竟 admissions officers 佢哋都會點樣去睇呢？
My answer is always it depends, but just know that colleges are going to look at the student in the context of where they're coming from, but they're going to look at the student in the high school environment first. So if your student is abroad, they are going to be reviewed by the person who's reading that high school, right? By that geographic expert. So if they're in New Jersey, for example, they're going to be read by the person who's reading that part of New Jersey. And your student will be compared directly to their classmates. If that admissions officer feels they also need some additional information where they want to understand how this student compares if they had stayed in Hong Kong, then they're going to, after they read the application, they're going to pass it on to the admissions officer who also reads Hong Kong, and they will give them some feedback, right? So this tends to happen, right? And this way they can know, is the student strong in this pool? Is the student also strong in this pool over here? But they're always looking at you in the context of where you are. So if you were at a UK boarding school, they're going to expect you to be able to, compete at that level, and they're going to compare you directly to your peers, okay? If you have a US or Canadian passport, I believe that will just make the process of getting financial aid and certain merit scholarships a bit easier, but there's no direct benefit at a selective institution, especially at a place like Harvard. They again don't have any quotas, so it's not it's not going to be a benefit to you or a disadvantage to you. I think it'll just make the government piece of it a lot easier.
咁 Jeffrey 都講到啦，其實 admissions officers 佢哋最主要係睇翻學生喺邊一間 high school 嗰度讀書嘅，意思即係話邊一個地區。咁即使譬如 for example 有一個香港學生佢係攞住美國 passport 喺美國讀緊 boarding school 嘅，咁先會係同翻佢哋自己學校嘅其他學生去做一個 compete 啦。咁之後咧成個 case 亦都會俾翻take care 香港地區嘅嗰個 admissions officer 再去俾個 second opinion， 咁所以成件事亦都唔會話因為你攞咗嗰個 passport 就會有好大嘅 advantage， 最主要亦都係睇翻你成個 application 入邊會有啲乜嘢內容啦，同埋有啲乜嘢自己 unique 嘅地方係突顯到出嚟嘅。
All right, so just kind of a summary, some final advice. Make sure you are doing things outside of the classroom. It's a huge part of the process. It's really important for you to get started with your activities, with exploring what you enjoy doing or don't enjoy doing, and start to think of, start to plan your activities, what you want to do, your summers, the classes you're going to take with some intention. So that means you need to check in with yourself. That means you need to think about your goals. And that means you also need to, say to yourself, why am I doing this? Why do I like this? Why don't I like this? And really have these kind of honest conversations with yourself and with your parents and your families. Yeah, that's a really huge piece of it. You engage, the earlier you start, the better. The more you know yourself, the better. The later you start, we can still help you, but it definitely becomes more of a struggle later on. I've worked with many students who, all of a sudden they have to write this personal statement that's truly about themselves and is, not about what you want to study, not about your career path, and is really meant to highlight your characteristics and your personal experiences. And students just dread it. They just don't know what to do. They get really overwhelmed. They've never really asked themselves why. They just know that they needed to succeed, and now they're at this point and they have no idea what to say. So We need to push our students to check in with themselves, to ask themselves these questions, because not only will it benefit them in the college process, it's just going to help them have more intention and direction and be more connected with themselves and likely be a lot happier.
咁知道好多嘅家長可能今日係第一次去聽 Crimson Education 啦，咁所以我哋都會想好快同大家去講講究竟我哋係點樣去幫呢一啲嘅學生。咁呢度會係一個 typical 嘅 preparation timeline 啦，你會見到成件事呢係會由你自己嘅 high school 最後嗰4年開始嘅。如果你係行美制嘅，就會係 grade 9啦。咁如果行英制就會係 year 10。咁但係除咗你話我哋呢一 part 去做大學嘅申請之外呢，由11歲開始嘅學生呢，其實我哋都有另外一個 program 叫做 Crimson Rise 去幫佢哋去了解自己個強弱項啦，亦都去幫佢哋知道究竟呢個世界有乜嘢唔同嘅行業或者工作係 available 嘅。咁呢度亦都會見到由一開始成個 preparation journey 去到後面，究竟我哋點樣喺 academic 啦、extracurricular activities 同埋 leadership 啦，同埋你自己個 personal brand 嗰度去幫大家嘅。咁呢度就會係我哋其中一個特色啦，喺 Crimson。好似頭先一開始都有略略提及到啦，我哋會係一個 teaching team 嘅形式，會去幫大家。咁所以左邊就會有我哋嘅 core team 啦，咁右邊就會有 support team，係睇翻你自己個 CV 有啲乜嘢要去執，咁我哋就會去幫翻你哋去揾埋呢一啲唔同嘅 opportunities 去幫大家嘅。咁呢度我哋都會包括咗我哋自己 Crimson 個 admission rate 啦。咁喺中間嗰個 column 咧就會見到 general 喺大學佢哋自己 publish 出嚟嘅嗰個 stat。咁右邊黃色嗰度咧就會係我哋 Crimson 最 proud of 嘅一個數字嚟嘅。咁其實 in general 啦，學生其實同我哋 engage 咗之後咧，其實佢哋係 4.5 times more likely 去攞呢一啲嘅 offer 嘅。咁呢度會係我哋其中一個 Crimson 好重要嘅 philosophy， 我哋唔係淨係話去幫最 top 嘅學生，因為每一個學生都有自己嘅 full potential，be a better version of 佢自己。咁所以呢一個就會係點解每一件事每一個 case 我哋都會 customize 成個 program scope 俾佢哋，亦都係去 customize 成件事究竟係點樣去幫佢哋去做啦。咁因為時間關係啦，咁可能我哋未必喺呢度可以進行到個 Q&A。咁但係如果你哋有興趣呢，咁亦都可以填翻嗰張紙或者右邊呢一度嘅 QR code，咁可以 book 翻一個鐘頭嘅時間去同我哋去做一個詳細啲嘅見面啦。咁左邊就會係因為 Defrey 佢喺香港啦，咁如果你哋亦都會想一陣間好快同佢一個15分鐘嘅一個 catch up 或者一個 get to know each other， 有個 quick feedback， 咁亦都可以 scan 翻左邊嘅 QR code 去約翻嗰個時間嘅。咁今日好多謝大家出席啦，咁亦都Crimson 亦都好開心喺度同大家去見面。咁我哋一陣會喺 room 3 to 4嘅，咁填咗嗰份 form 亦都可以歡迎俾翻我哋所有有 Crimson 個 pin 嘅同事。咁喺度再次多謝大家 ，thank you。Thank
you so much, Devery and Jonathan.
Hello， 各位家長同學，你哋好。今日好開心喺呢度見到你哋，亦都首先好多謝滙豐邀請 Academic Asia 同大家分享一啲英國教育嘅資料啦。咁我哋希望今日嘅資料對你哋嚟講係有用啦。咁我相信呢，在座各位呢，今日嚟到嘅其中一個目的啦，係希望揾一啲高質素嘅教育俾自己嘅仔女嘅。其實喺呢度呢，我好想多謝各位家長對高質素教育嘅要求㗎。點解呢？因為正正你哋有呢一個要求，我哋嘅下一代呢，先至能夠可以接受一啲高質素嘅教育。咁因為佢哋接受到高質素嘅教育之後呢，佢哋可能會發展出無限嘅可能性啦。而因為佢哋發展出無限嘅可能性呢，咁佢哋可能將來喺人類嘅文明發展中呢，係寫出新嘅一頁嘅。咁我哋 Academic Asia 呢，亦都好希望幫我哋嘅同學啦，揾到佢最適合、最理想嘅學校，而喺當中佢重要嗰幾年呢，係能夠發揮到自己啦，發掘到自己嘅潛能，增進自己，將來發光發熱喺唔同嘅範疇裏邊呢，都可以創造出自己精彩嘅人生。咁常言道啦，精彩嘅人生呢，係從精彩嘅教育開始。咁精彩嘅教育呢，我哋相信呢，係唔能夠冇咗海外升學㗎。咁所以我哋今日咧就請咗兩位喺英國啦，做咗教育界咧20幾年嘅校長級嘅人物，同我哋講下英國嘅教育。Without further ado, may I now pass you over to Miss Giles Dineney.
Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. As Batty said, my name is Giles Delaney. Up until last year, I was the headmaster of a preparatory school in Windsor, England. I was a headmaster for nearly 17 years, and many of our boys, the majority of our boys, would move from St John's to schools that you will all have heard of. Schools like Eton, Winchester, Tonbridge, Wellington, and Harrow were the 5 most popular schools for our boys to go. So I have 17 years of experience of preparing and watching children grow through those years, overcoming some of the challenges, flourishing through some of those challenges. And it's a pleasure to join Academic Asia and be part of their growth strategy for the future. Part of my experience outside of St John's was working at and with Oxford University for 2 years on a research program into student independence, particularly for children, boys and girls between the ages of 11 and 14 and 15, and understanding how children perceive independence and how they use it in their lives and how it becomes a part of their independent growth and flourishing. So I hope to share some of that experience with you. Just by way of a brief introduction to UK schools. Some of the things I think we recognise when we are preparing children to move to some of the country's leading schools is to recognise some of the differences, some of the adaptations that children need to grow into if they're going to make the most out of a transition to the British system. The breadth of curriculum, I think, is something that is hugely important and different in England, not just the extracurricular programme, but the way, the breadth of academic subjects, for example, that are offered. Character and identity are particularly important in the English system, I feel. When I talk about character and identity, what do I mean? Well, when I talk about a child's identity, that's a way that they plug into the school they're in. That's the way that the school recognises them. Our identity is often developed from what we're good at, what we enjoy doing, what we're comfortable, the areas that we excel in. And quite frankly, it's very easy to do well at the things we enjoy and the things we're good at. I think if you're thinking of your son or daughter moving over to the United Kingdom, I think it's also important to understand character. And that's developed from the things that we're not good at, the things that we don't enjoy. And that becomes a particularly important factor or feature if your son or daughter are planning to move to the United Kingdom. I think giving some careful thought to that is important. English schools, I find, have developed particularly in their innovation, in their adaptability, and having your son or daughter being equally adaptable, equally open to challenge is important. But also the idea of enrichment. English schools offer a huge breadth, particularly as the majority of you will be looking at is for boarding schools. And of course there's a huge range of things that your sons and daughters can get engaged in outside of the academic curriculum as well. So I hope they would take advantage of that. I want to say a word about league tables. League tables are undoubtedly a way of assessing the effectiveness and the success of a school, but I speak both as a headmaster and as a parent of 4 daughters who are just finishing the English education system. When we chose the school for our daughters 14 years ago, I was very much in your situation. We wanted to be aspirational for them. We wanted them to do well academically. We wanted them to get to a good university and enjoy their life with all of that success. And so we went and we chose one of the best schools we could, a school that is regularly in the top 10. Would I choose that school 14 years later? Definitely, unequivocally for one, possibly for the second, and not for the third and the fourth. And why? Because the school isn't a good school? Absolutely not. It's an outstanding school. It's just not a good fit for my 2 daughters. It's a bit like buying an Armani suit. They make wonderful suits, but they don't look brilliant on all of us. And I think if there's one thing that you can do as parents is be aspirational for your children, but get the best possible fit, because their life is going to be dependent on their sense of confidence, their sense to make the most of the opportunities they're given. And if you find the right school, the right fit, then you will have done one of the most special things you possibly can for your son and daughter. So get some good advice on that. I want to talk a little bit about, for those of you who have children between the ages of maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11, then you will be starting to think about the process of which school and what's going to happen when you go through that system. And my experience tells me that there are 4 key things that schools are going to look for in your son and daughter. Obviously, it goes without saying their academic ability is going to be one of those core. But also what I've found in the, over my time as headmaster of St John's, we've sent nearly 300 boys to the schools that I've mentioned a moment ago. So I've got a lot of experience of receiving feedback from heads. I've had a lot of feedback from those boys that haven't been offered places, but I've had a lot of feedback from the boys who have. I say boys because my school was a boys' school. Apologies if that confuses. But and these are the things that time and time again were what I call the deal breakers. These were the ones that pushed those children who were borderline over the edge. But also, I have to say, boys who were extremely strong academic performers were not offered places because of this as well. And the first is curiosity. And it strikes me that if as parents we answer all of the questions for our children, if we make all of the decisions for our children, we are robbing them of something purely really, really valuable, and that is the opportunity to make mistakes and be curious about the world. So we can talk, or maybe there'll be an opportunity for questions afterwards, but curiosity is so very, very valuable. Motivation, the whole sense of a child understanding why they're doing something. What is the long-term goal for them? And when schools find children who are genuinely motivated, self-motivated, it shows. The one thing I really, really wanted to talk about, though, was independence. And this probably is the most important. When we talk to children about independence, when we say the word independence, what your 11-year-old, 10 and 8-year-old child is thinking is freedom. They're thinking, okay, independence means I can choose my bedtime. Independence means I can ride the MTR home when I'm old enough. For them, independence means showing you that they can cope. They can exist in this world with all of the challenges. When a secondary school thinks about independence, they're not thinking that. They're thinking the kind of independence that enables your son or daughter to step away from their cohort and be their own person, make their own decisions, ask their own questions, not read the same books that every other person in their year group is reading, not to be the person who's recommended to, but the person who does the recommending. And if you can encourage your son or daughter to be able to do that, it will make, first of all, the world of difference to them as human beings and learners, but it is going to come across hugely when they have their interview. And be aware, interviews are a wonderful tool for schools to find out what your son and daughter is like, what their habits are. You can't simply 1 month before get your son or daughter ready for an interview. Their brain won't allow it. Under pressure, their brain will emit certain signals and it will stop them being able to think quite analytically, and they will expose their habits. So what will happen is the brain will be saying in an interview, answer quickly, answer quickly, answer quickly. So what your son and daughter will do is take the first answer that occurs to them. If it's the first answer, it's probably the most obvious answer. And if it's the most obvious answer to your son and daughter, it's going to be the most obvious answer to every other one's sons and daughters. So what we need to try and do is develop habits in your sons and daughters, habits that they can remember instinctively. So if there's one thing I would encourage you to do, is to provide opportunities for your sons and daughters to be independent, to ask questions about the world. As a parent, I understand absolutely the tendency to want to correct. If you see your son and daughter going in the direction, it's only natural to nudge them back in. But at some stage, they have got to learn they've taken the wrong route. And it's a wonderful time to be able to do it now. It's too late when they're 17 and 18. So whatever you do, give your sons and daughters the opportunity to think independently. Not just ride the MTR and decide what time they go to bed, but give them opportunities to think independently, come up with their own views, and then discuss them with them, obviously. If you have aspirations for your son or daughter to go to a school in the United Kingdom, then there are going to be 3 points of assessment that the school will use to measure the suitability of your child. The first will be an academic test, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The second will be an interview, and the third will be a reference from their current school. Now, if I can give you some tips for an interview. If your child looks and imagines the interview as they are a bit like a DHL courier, they are delivering something. They're delivering themselves. Do they know who they're delivering? Do they know what they're delivering? When someone asks them who they are, that is one of the... I help a number of children get ready for interviews, and the first question I ask them is, if the person interviewing you wrote 4 words down about you, what would those 4 words be? You would be amazed by the number of children who look blankly. Now, the question is, they probably don't know who they are. They know who you want them to be, possibly, but they don't know who they are. If you don't know who you are, if you don't know what inspires you, if you don't know what challenges you, if you don't know what brings the best out in you, what kind of learning environment do you want to be in? If you don't know those questions, how are you going to unpack yourself at an interview? So the first thing is to understand who they are. And the second thing is to understand that schools want independence and they want creativity. But children tend to think of creativity as, well, I play the cello and I can draw really beautifully and I can sing like an angel. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about creativity. We're talking about being able to think like nobody else, to think in a way that children your age don't normally think about. And so in an interview, what happens is a child will hear a question and they will start asking the top level of that question, the most obvious part of that question. Creative children will stop and they will interpret the question before they start answering it. Let me give you an example. If I asked your son or daughter, if you could recommend a book to me, what book would you recommend? What most children will hear is, let me tell you about my favourite book. Nothing wrong with that. You've answered the question. But in that question, I am going to find 4 really vital things about your son or daughter. First of all, the quality of their reading. If they're reading a comic or if they're reading Winston Churchill's memoirs, I'm going to make a judgment about this type of books they read. I'm also going to make a judgment about their character, the kind of things that motivate them. So if they're telling me about a political book, great. If they're telling me about a Second World War warship book, great. But more importantly, there is a subliminal question there that if they listen carefully and take their time, they will pick up. And the question wasn't, don't give me your favorite book. The question was, recommend a book to me. So what I need the child to do is understand what it's like to stand in my shoes. I'm not an 11-year-old girl or boy. I'm a old man. And in which case, they may not know what it's like to be a 21-year-old man. Let's use that for example. But what I want them to do is I want them to appreciate that they've got to step out of their own shoes. They've got to try and understand what it's like to be me and then recommend a book that they think I'm going to enjoy. That's what a creative question looks like. But also, it tells me something about the choice of books. If they tell me in the interview that they're brave and courageous and open-minded and all of those kind of things, but then they say Harry Potter to me, I'm going to make a judgment of, well, everybody reads that, so is that a brave, is it a courageous book to read? Or have you tried to read something different? So behind every single question that they are going to be asked, what did you do at the weekend? Most children will literally say what they've done at the weekend. The creative children will think, why am I being asked this? I'm being asked this by a housemaster of a boarding school. Okay, I'm going to look at this slightly differently. So when we get children ready for interviews, what we don't do is practice questions. What we do is practice interpreting questions. We practice sitting in their shoes. So when I work with children, they have to interview me as well. What's it like being an interviewer, trying to interpret an answer? So there's a lot that goes into getting children ready for interviews. The academic test, the first thing they will do is they will be invited to sit an ISEB adaptive pretest. ISEB stands for the Independent Schools Examination Board. They are the company that oversee the test at 11. It's an adaptive test. If you hear that word, don't be scared. All that means is that it's a better way of assessing your son or daughter's potential. So it means that if they get question 1 right, then question 2 will be harder. If they don't get question 1 right, stay on that level until they do get it right. So the brighter, talented academic students will find that they're able to climb the ladder much, much quicker. The test, it takes about 2.5 hours to administer. There are a range of different centres around Hong Kong. Academic Asia is one of them. There are 4 tests: the English, the verbal reasoning, the non-verbal reasoning, and mathematics. Verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning aren't traditionally taught in Hong Kong schools, and the kind of English that you would find in this test also probably wouldn't be taught in Hong Kong schools. The maths very largely may well be. So we would absolutely recommend that you think about preparing for that a year out, at least a year out. And then you've got plenty of time for your son or daughter to make graduated progress towards the required level. If your son or daughter is successful in that test, that does not mean they've been offered a place at the school. What that means is they are now through to the next level. The next level is a second stage assessment. That is much more oriented towards each particular school. So the Eton next stage assessment will be at a different time and a different place, in a different context to, say, the Harrow or the Charterhouse test. So getting some advice on that, people will be able to talk you through. But typically, very generally, there is an English and a maths test again. There is occasionally a science test. There is usually a group activity. So your son or daughter will be invited to join in with a group of other students, and they'll be observed in how they work. And then there's the interview, which is what I've just been talking about. Academic Asia, just to say a little bit about Academic Asia. Part of the reason for my joining the company, Academic Asia, for 40 years has been a consultancy program, and the reason I joined Academic Asia, I was a headmaster in the United Kingdom for 17 years, and Academic Asia had enjoyed a reputation that no other company even came close to for reliability, experience, honesty, integrity. So it's a pleasure to be able to join them. My job is head of education, so I am responsible for developing the academic program. Beforehand, Academic Asia would be a consultant, so you would come to the company, they would tell you the schools that your son or daughter would be applicable for, and you would apply. What we want to do is help parents and students become more aspirational. So this is where your son or daughter may get into, but can we help you in any way build on that? So that's what we're doing at the moment. But Academic Asia have exclusive relationships with a number of schools, particularly Tonbridge and Harrow. So if you're interested in those kind of schools, then you would be directed towards us anyway. And we're pleased to be setting up a personalised teaching and mentoring program over the next few weeks, which will start very shortly. We offer support for families, so you may feel that you need a bit more help and support in looking at the landscape of English schools and the difference between co-ed and single sex, or boys and girls, or IB or A-level, in which case you're welcome to come and talk to us. We'll be glad to give you some help with that. We can help you with the application, the actual process of applying for the schools, and some parents will have a range of offers and they won't know which school to choose, which is best for their son or daughter. We're happy to help you with that as well. If you do feel you need some help and support with the ISEB test, then I'm developing the program as we speak, and that's almost ready for completion. I will be delivering some of it, but I'll be helped with some of it as well by other very experienced tutors. I'm just going to say something very briefly about our new Helix program. There are 3 different sections to this. There is a senior section, so eventually your son or daughter may have aspirations for going to one of the UK's finest universities. It would be LSE, it could be Oxbridge. Depending on what they're going to learn, they may want to do law, they may want to do medicine, they may want to do economics. Well, if that's the case, then they're going to need to be prepared for the LNAT or the BMAT or the interview preparation. So we provide support for that. I will be liaising closely with all of the secondary schools. So it's my plan to go to all of the parents' evenings and represent families so I can understand better the help that our students need, and then we will target our tutoring specifically towards those areas rather than a generic tutoring program. And there'll also be some exciting extended learning opportunities and professional mentorship with doctors and economists and the like. If you've got a son or daughter who's 11, now you may have been offered a place at an English prep school, in which case we would play a role in helping your son or daughter prepare for an academic scholarship at 13. But for many of our parents, they get a place at 11 for 13, but they keep their son or daughter in Hong Kong, and that's absolutely understandable why you would do that. There are moments as a headmaster when I recognise that children coming from overseas were overwhelmed with the fact that they were leaving their families and any other emotional crisis that would strike them. But added to that, they had to learn French, they had to learn Latin, they had to do English literature and taught in a way that they'd never been taught. History is completely different, geography is quite different. Rather than being taught general science, all of a sudden they were taught chemistry, physics and biology. It's quite an overwhelming experience, and so we wanted to put in place a bridging program that would help students, and we've written an exciting bridging program. I don't say any more about that, but I've finished. Thank you very much indeed, and I'm going to hand back to Batty.
Thank you。咁我哋多謝Mr. Delaney 嘅分享啦。咁喺呢度咧，我簡單咁 recap 佢頭先講嘅少少細節啦。關於英國學校方面咧，就英國學校一般係提供傳統價值觀同埋前瞻性嘅教學嘅環境嘅，亦都致力培養學生嘅學術嘅能力啦、性格啦同埋各方面嘅技能嘅。咁至於排名榜嗰方面咧，就家長就要謹慎啦，要小心了解下排名榜嘅資訊係啲乜嘢啦，因為佢哋咧並唔能夠證明學校嘅教學質量嘅，只係證明公開試嘅成績㗎。反而咧，家長可以考慮了解下學校嘅一啲叫做增值嘅數據。咁如果要入英國頂尖嘅學校咧，通常學生就要具備一啲比較理想嘅學術能力啦，有好奇心啦、積極性啦，同埋獨立性嘅。咁除此之外咧，學生最好有廣泛嘅興趣，咁就可以準備一份豐富嘅 CV 啦。學校整體評估基本上咧有3個大嘅原則嘅。第一個咧就係學術嘅測試啦，第二個係個人嘅面試啦，第三個就係學校提供嘅推薦信。咁大多數英國嘅頂尖學校咧都會要求學生喺11歲嘅時候參加一個 ISCB Common Pretest 嘅，咁就包括英文、數學啦、文字同埋非文字嘅推理題嘅。咁如果學生喺呢個初期嘅階段表現出色嘅話咧，咁學校就會邀請佢哋做第2個評估嘅。咁如果都表現出色嘅話咧，就會有機會被取錄嘅。咁通常學校面試咧都係想睇下個學生適唔適合讀佢間學校啦。咁同埋學生本身有冇好奇心、獨立性同埋創造力嘅。其實創造力咧就 Giles 嘅意思係講唔係淨係話音樂或者藝術咁樣，而係一啲比較廣泛嘅創造力，包括一啲創新同埋創造嘅思維嘅。咁 Giles 嘅 tips 俾大家咧就係盡早細心咁思考下呢啲問題啦，以確保自己嘅小朋友咧養成良好嘅學習嘅態度啦，培養佢哋嘅求知欲啦，同埋等評估嘅時候嘅表現會做得比較好啲。咁呢啲 tips 就係 from Giles 嘅。Without further ado, may I now pass you over to Mr. Clark?
Thank you, Batty. Nice to be here as well, and lovely to work with Academic Asia. Very quickly, you're thinking about your son or daughter going to boarding school. Well, I was a boarder from the age of 8, so I know what it's like, and it's not always easy. And so I'm talking to you from an experience as a teacher, 32 years of teaching, but also having been a boarder as well. And I then went to Exeter University and then Cambridge University for 2 years, and I've taught in some fantastic schools at Wellington College, at Caterham, and now headmaster at Battle Abbey. So I hope my experience is going to be useful. what's lovely for me is I was telling Tim and Ian earlier, I just love coming back to Hong Kong. I'm going to let you into a secret. This will tell you how old I am. In 1966, my parents moved to Hong Kong and I was a baby. And we lived the most incredible experience here for 2 years. They were exciting times. You probably don't remember, of course, it was the Cultural Revolution in China. Hong Kong was going through a really interesting, really historic phase. We were only stayed for 2 years. I was a baby. I don't remember much of it at all. My father's told me all about it. I've seen all the pictures, the old cine movies. But guess what? I was so lucky. We came back in 1978 when I was a teenager. And I had the best time ever in Hong Kong. I have the most wonderful memories. So coming back here is such a pleasure. And it's such a pleasure to see a few things that are the same. There's been so much building, but still a few things are the same, and it's great to come back. So I love working with Academic Asia, and I have to tell you, I love working with Hong Kong students. I think I understand them a little bit. I am ashamed to tell you I've forgotten almost all my Cantonese. I remember 10 words. Do you want to tell me if these are correct? Are you ready? Yeah, how's that? Was that all right? I'm ashamed to say that's all I can remember of my Cantonese. And so every time I come, I want to learn a few more words. So when Giles was saying that he gets the students to interview them, I do the same, and I always try and get them to teach me a few Cantonese words, which is lovely. So I love coming back here for so many reasons, and I love working with Hong Kong teenagers, and they're so interesting, Hong Kong teenagers. They are so lucky to be brought up in this incredible place, this incredibly cosmopolitan, interesting, international, entrepreneurial place. It is such a privilege. And for this bit, I'm going to stand up for a second. Because they get to have one foot in Asia, and then if they come to the UK, 1 foot in Europe. And so what we're hoping to do now is prepare them for their global future. It's interesting, when I grew up, when Giles grew up, we were very much part of what was called the European generation. With Brexit and other things, that's changed. We're now part of the international, the global generation. Your children, these little ones, are going to be preparing for a global world. They'll be working in China, of course they will, in New York, in London, all over the world, and that's so exciting for them. And so I love working with Hong Kong students to help them prepare for their global future. And it's always good to be back in Hong Kong. I'm going to talk briefly about applying for sixth form level, so slightly older. I'm used to getting older students into schools. And then universities briefly, but actually careers first. Because think about it for a second. And I'm going to give you 2 little examples. I'm actually going to start with careers first. This is really interesting. Every time I speak to a young teenager from Hong Kong, I love asking them, what is their dream job one day? What is their ambition? What do they want to do? And often they have pretty fixed ideas, which is fantastic. They'll end up being great entrepreneurs, I'm sure they will. But they often know what they want to do. So we start with that and we work backwards. You need to know where your destination is before you can plan your journey. Yeah? And too many teenagers in the UK stumble upon their future. There's no planning. Yeah? And so we always start with this. What is your dream job one day? What do you want to do? What is your aspirations? What's your ambition in 10, 15 years' time? And we work backwards. And I love doing that with sixth formers when they apply for sixth form. Because you can apply for sixth form into the UK at 16 plus, and you can either do A-levels or the IB. I read an article only yesterday in the South China Morning Post about the debate that they were taking place, even in this country, about the difference between IB and A-levels. I tend to think that the A-level route favours Hong Kong students, but I'm open to discussion on that. But I tend to think that favours Hong Kong students. And so once we know their destination, we can really help them with their journey. And that starts with choosing the right subjects at A-level. Because if you're going to be a lawyer, you've got to have the right A-level combination. Of course, if you're going to be a doctor, you need to do biology and chemistry. If you want to be an engineer, you have to have the maths and science. What about the architects? So we work backwards like that. And I love spending time mentoring, coaching, interviewing, speaking to students about planning their options. So please, 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 never choose a school at sixth form level until that school has given you plenty of time to talk about your future options. Don't let them take you for granted. They'll want you to say, yes, join. Yeah, you say, well, hang on a second, I'll join when you've given me lots of information, give me lots of advice, until you've spoken to my child and knows what my child's passions are, what his or her ambitions are. Then we'll sign up. When you've got a plan for my child, then we'll sign up. So that's where it starts. Really important to get that right. Okay? I'm going to give you 2 quick examples of 2 wonderful Hong Kong students that I helped support at my school and mentored. One was Jane, and one was Hank. And I'm going to tell you about Cruz as well. I'm going to start with Cruz. I can't forget Cruz. Cruz is an utter legend. He was an amazing boy. Absolutely amazing boy. And his dream job, and I said to him one day, what's your dream job? And his dream job is to be a diplomat. He's the first time I've ever had a Hong Kong student want to be a diplomat. And I'm going to tell you about his story in a moment. But Cruz was incredible. But I'm going to start with Jane. So Jane joined us in the lower 6 in year 12. But before that, we'd worked out with her, I did a lot of Zoom calls with her, that she wanted to be an architect. So we got her subjects right. She was a very, very gifted mathematician. And so she did maths, further maths. The physics helps with the architecture. And of course, she did fine art. She was actually a girl who was a brilliant artist, but she was a brilliant at copying, not creating. She was brilliant. If she said, paint Giles, she would paint Giles, and it looked like a photograph. So we said, come on, you are already a beautiful artist, let's make you a beautiful thinker and a creator and an inventor and someone to take it to the next level. And that was exciting. And then we realized she's utterly brilliant at maths and physics, and we got her on the Oxbridge program. Ian will be pleased to know she went to Cambridge, not Oxford, Ian. She went to Cambridge, you see, and to do architecture. And it was fantastic. And then, of course, Giles talked earlier about how important it is to do these wonderful extracurricular activities. And we love the fact that your children might want to play basketball. And we love the fact they'll be in the orchestra. But more and more, the top universities are interested in what's called the supracurricular, not just the extracurricular. Quick Latin lesson. Extracurricular is outside the curriculum. Supra is above the curriculum. So what did we do with Jane? Well, we made sure Jane got some fantastic work experience here as well as the UK. She joined something called RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, as a student, a member. She'd go to lectures in London. Unbelievable, with some of the best architects in the world. She did something called an EPQ, a wonderful project, the EPQ, the Extended Project Qualification, on Ai Weiwei, the incredible Chinese architect who designed the Bird's Nest Stadium at the 2008 Olympics. It's an incredible building. She hadn't heard of him. She did this project on him. It was mind-blowing. Yeah? And then she entered a national competition. She came 3rd, nationally. Cambridge had to say yes, because she'd done so much. Her academics were amazing, but her supracurriculum was even better. And that's what set her apart. She did something extra. She had the X factor, and she embraced it, and I love that about her. Hank, very quickly, Hank, the first club Hank joined at school was the Young Engineers. And straight away I knew he was doing maths, physics, further maths. We knew this boy was an engineer, okay? And he entered something called the F1 for Schools competition, the Formula 1 for Schools. It's a national competition in the UK. In year 2, when he was in the upper 6, he was captain of the team. They went to the national finals at Warwick University. They were placed, top 10 teams in the country out of 25,000 entries, top 10 in the country. He then applied for something incredibly difficult to get. It's something called the Arkwright Scholarship. The Arkwright Scholarship. It's an amazing thing. 12 students in the whole country out of 2,000 or 3,000 who applied get one. He got the Arkwright Scholarship. He did the maths challenges. He ended up doing the maths Olympiad. Okay? He did those extra supracurricular things that set him apart, that gave him the X factor. Imperial College couldn't say no. So he did engineering at Imperial. And he's got a great future ahead. He's got a great future ahead. But I'm going to finish with Cruz, because this is the bit that I really want to press upon you. And I'm so pleased that the Hong Kong teenagers I'm meeting are getting better at this. This is key. We need our students, our Hong Kong students, to develop what's called their soft skills. We need them to develop their soft skills. So when I met Cruz for the first time, and Cruz said he wanted to be a diplomat, I said to Cruz, okay, you want to be a diplomat? So I said, imagine you've applied, and 100 people have applied as well to be a diplomat, 100 people, okay? And like you, and Cruz is very bright, very, very good academics. And they've all got excellent academics, not all of them, okay? But they choose the top 5 for interview, for 2 days of interview to be a diplomat. And all 5 of you, like him, have got excellent grades. And they come for a 2-day interview process. I said to Cruz, who's going to get the job? On paper, you're all the same. On paper, all 5 of you are brilliant. But Cruz, you really want it. Who gets the job? And we spent half an hour discussing this. And sure enough, he then told me what soft skills were. He says, you've got to show some passion. Yeah. You've got to show some ambition. Yeah. You've got to be a great communicator. A great communicator. How do we communicate? Give me 3 ways, 4 ways we communicate. We communicate by text, by email, by writing, by talking, non-verbally. We communicate one-to-one. We communicate in small groups. We communicate in front of 60, 70, 80 people. We communicate in front of 500 people. I'll never forget Cruz's, he did a whole school assembly in front of 550 people. Cruz, he had us, he was I think one of the best speakers I've ever heard. He's from Hong Kong. He's from Hong Kong. And then he said, you've got to be a leader. And then we discussed what leadership meant. You've got to be a great team player. You've got to be creative. You've got to think outside the box. And then we started talking about something called emotional intelligence. You know what emotional intelligence is? It's amazing. And he started telling me about emotional intelligence, reading body language and understanding cultures and how people work. And my goodness, after 30 minutes, Cruz understood soft skills. And he developed his soft skills. Yeah? I guarantee you, he will be a diplomat. Yeah? I guarantee you he will be a diplomat. So that's what we try and do. That's what we try and do. We're always trying to say to those students, yeah, what's your destination and how can we help with the journey? And you know, one of the best ways you can help with the journey is working with the best. And Academic Asia, of course, are the best here. And working with people like Giles and Batty and Tim and Ian, you're not going to get any better. Yeah, the experience they've got, the contacts they've got, the network they have, and just all the tips to build that journey. But remember, that journey doesn't happen in 6 weeks. You start thinking early. And remember, your children have an incredibly bright future. 1 foot in Asia, 1 foot in Europe. The global future is very bright. Thank you, Batty.
Thank you so much. Thank you. 或者我又簡單講翻Mr. Clark 佢嘅諗法啦。咁佢大家可能都知道佢同香港有好大嘅淵源啦。佢非常之愛香港嘅，亦都好愛同香港嘅學生幫助佢哋完成佢哋嘅夢想啦。希望佢哋變成一個世界性同埋國際性嘅學生嘅。咁至於喺將來嘅鋪路上啦。咁 Mr. Clark 就覺得咧，首先要有一個諗法，究竟將來嘅理想工作係啲乜嘢，然後就向翻前去望，究竟點樣選擇A level 啊，或者 IB 啊，係邊啲課程係比較適合學生嘅。咁其實 Mr. Clark 就覺得咧，香港學生嚟講咧 A level 係比較適合佢哋多一啲嘅咁樣。咁最緊要啦，就要有計劃嘅咁。咁亦都啦，希望各位同學咧就有自己嘅思考啦，有做多啲課外活動啦，因為喺學術成績當然係緊要啦，但係課外活動嗰度咧就會令同學咧就比其他同學可能有多啲唔同嘅經驗啦，亦都會俾人哋有優勝嘅地方嘅。咁亦都要有自己嘅 passion 啦，即係有自己中意做嘅嘢啦。最好有好嘅溝通嘅能力，亦都有創造力啦。最好情緒嘅指數咧，亦都係即係我哋講嘅 EQ 啦，都要即係識得去鍛鍊啦咁樣。咁佢常都做咗一個動作啦，就係我哋香港學生其實係好好嘅。一隻腳踏喺亞洲，一隻腳踏喺歐洲，將來成為一個 global citizen 啦，咁即係世界性嘅人類咧係有好大嘅益處嘅。咁多謝 ，thank you so much。